Hello and welcome to another Frenchman Learns About the History of Japan reaction stream, I guess. And yeah, today should be, we'll see, the final stream for the Sengoku Jidai. I think it's the 7th stream or 6th maybe. Yeah, we have 14 episodes to go, I believe. Obviously, I think the first episode is called The Death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, but it's already what happened last time, basically at the end of the Imjin War, which was really interesting. Something that I might come back to. It's a topic that I'd like to see more of, yeah. But yeah, as always, watching the videos by the great channel, The Shogunate, which is, I guess, the peak series on YouTube about the Sengoku Jidai, and, you know, I'm really glad it's what we've been watching. At first I only planned to do a 3-hour video from King's Dungeon Hall, but I guess that one would have covered only the battles, not really the politics and everything. But this series right here is exactly what I was hoping for, you know. So yeah, no big thanks again for the introduction. And obviously links to the playlist with all the videos from the Shogunate in the description. The link to my Discord if you'd like to follow me, my stream element, Patreon where you can support me. And actually we're probably not done with the Shogunate. After this is Edo period, right? And I think they have a series for that as well, even though I'm not sure if it's finished. I have it somewhere. Where did I put it? Oh yeah, this might be the one. Well, this is some of it. Yeah, so they have a series about the Edo period. So I guess we'll probably watch that. And if it's not finished, I guess I'll potentially finish it through some like other videos or maybe Wikipedia. But yeah, this channel was really peak, especially for the Sengoku Jidai. It's been a lot of fun, but yeah, last time again, Imjin War, I think it was for me the downfall of Hideyoshi. He really seemed like a different person throughout this. No matter the justification, his decisions were terrible, right? I don't know if, you know, it would have been much better if like Nobunaga was the one to do it or something, but yeah, Hideyoshi was so good until he had conquered Japan, and after that, yeah, just mistake after mistake after mistake. Obviously his health was declining, so you know, it's part of it. There's also like the different reasoning, you know, like he didn't have an heir, he was scared of like the Toyotomi losing power, so the Korea campaign was part of it, but it was all, you know, such a mess compared to all of the action he took in Japan itself. And yeah, I guess the last episode ended with his death, which I guess we're going to touch in this episode. And all I know after this is that, yeah, I guess Ieyasu will become the next shogun, but I don't know how. I'm sure there's gonna be some fighting, obviously, and I know that the Toyotomi house obviously doesn't last. So I guess we're gonna find out what happens. But yeah, it's been an absolute blast learning about all this. I really want to consume some media about the Sengoku Jidai. It's really such a shame. I was looking into it, and you know, there's some anime that, you know, touch a little bit on it, but stuff like Sengoku Basara and stuff like that seems kind of, you know, it's kind of a cheap shonen version of it. Then I was looking into manga, right? And a lot of them are not translated, and you know, some of them have like subject matter that are not quite about, you know, the conflict itself. It's like, you know, one of them I found was like about, you know, tea ceremony of the time and stuff like that. I guess games like Samurai Warriors is one option, yeah. I've already played 5 and Spirit of Sanada once. You know, game like Sokuo, Mountain Maid Sokuo, yeah, but still, I want to find more media about the Sengoku Jidai because, man, it's just so damn interesting. Yeah. Anyway, let's get into it with the death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi.
In the last episode, Toyotomi Hideyoshi launched his second invasion of the Korean peninsula, sending his samurai armies forth to fight in yet another hard campaign to seize territory on the mainland. Yet in his haste to prove his might on the world stage, his ailing health would finally catch up with him, as at long last, by September of 1598, he would die. Now we witness the build-up and aftermath of his passing as the daimyo of Japan assess the future of the nation.
It's kind of scary though, like, obviously, all you can think of is the country going to fall back into all the clans fighting for power, right? I mean, Because again, it's been so little since the unification by Hideyoshi, and there wasn't time to consolidate the power of the government or anything, right? It's scary. Sengoku Jidai. The death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi.
By the end of the summer of 1598, the second great unifier of Japan, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, was on his deathbed. Suffering from old age and illness, a life of campaigns that had withered him away, his body had given out and his mind was fading. Not to mention the fact that the developments of his second invasion of Korea no doubt were still causing him incredible stress. Famously, he had...
はじめまして。消毒よろしくお願いします。ありがとうございます。
asked his generals to not let his soldiers become ghosts in a foreign land. Yet that is exactly what he had just done. Perhaps due to his failing mental state, he was a constant ball of emotions. While it is said that he may have found the results of the second invasion satisfactory in regard to the damage his armies had inflicted on China and Korea, on the other hand, it was impossible to ignore that the invasion itself was a failure, one that would taint his legacy and family, no doubt for years to come. His very...
I mean, seriously, like, if Hideyoshi hadn't done that, he had just spent, like, the last couple, the last decade of his life just, pacifying Japan more and, consolidating the government, yeah. I mean, Hideyoshi would be, I would say, one of the best rulers of all time. Yeah.
Fears that he had initially set out to alleviate now had a very real possibility of coming to fruition, that being the downfall of his family and Japan collapsing back into war. For that, he must have felt only grief and remorse. Realizing the war to be done, we saw in the previous episode how he began to order his generals and their armies to return to Japan. But as for the situation at home, Hideyoshi, fearing for what might come following his death, began calling daimyo to Fushimi Castle, where they were to swear new vows of loyalty to him, his family, and his son and heir, Toyotomi Hideyori, a last-ditch desperate attempt to preserve his family's rule. However, Hideyori was still young, just a child of around 5 years of age. He would need...
Was it good? I've seen the reviews seem terrible.
Great help and guidance following the death of his father. To this end, shortly after his birth back in 1593, Hideyoshi had went forth with plans to form a council of regents, who could watch over the boy until he came of age and would be able to properly assume his father's role atop the country.
Don't listen to the critics.
It was a measure of precaution that upon Hideyoshi's death, this council would not only look after his son, but also ensure that no other member of the council could grow too powerful. By 1595, the council was formally announced. Its members included some of the strongest and most influential daimyo in all of Japan. Maeda Toshie, Mori Terumoto, Ukita Hideye, Kobayakawa Takakage, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. Yet it should be noted that by 1598, Katsu had been promoted to the council to replace Kobayakawa Takakage, who had passed away in 1597. This council of 5 regions would come to be known as Gotairo, and if you have been keeping up with this series, one of these names must appear more prominent than the others: Tokugawa Ieyasu. Why would Hideyoshi ever place his greatest rival and threat?
He's kind of old now, I mean, looking at the art at least. Yeah, he's definitely not the useful Ieyasu anymore.
On such a powerful and prestigious council. You see, what it gets back to is the idea of ensuring balance. The councilors were to keep each other in check, as I mentioned, so that one does not grow too mighty and attempt to usurp power. But as things stood, Tokugawa Ieyasu was already the strongest figure on this council. Yeah. Not only was he the lord of the Kanto region, making him extremely wealthy and well supplied, but also, we have previously seen he had skillfully kept his armies out of the war in Korea. While many had gone forth into the Imjin War, Ieyasu had stayed out, saving up his strength for his
So he
hour
lost
of
nothing.
destiny, a time which was soon to be upon him. As I have mentioned before, if Hideyoshi had proper foresight, perhaps he could have still somehow demanded the involvement of the Tokugawa to some degree in the invasions, either through manpower or supply. Because in the end, the war had come out to weaken at least 3 of the other council members who had lent their support, all while Ieyasu was...
They named their children name resembling to theirs, which is confusing, but it's better than European name. Their children the same name as they have. I don't know if that many people do that. Yeah. Personally, at least in France, I've never seen people do that. Yeah. But fair enough. It is true that some people do that. I remember like there's talking about a fighter in the US. I don't know if you guys know Kimbo Slice. He was kind of a legendary street fighter, and he had so many kids, and I think he named them like he was named Kimbo, and he named his son like Kimbo, his daughter Kimba. He would just change like 1 letter or something. Yeah, it was something. I love this quote. I used my sword only once in my life, but I sharpened it for 20 years. Ieyasu.
immune. Hideyoshi's final days were spent drifting in and out of consciousness, as daimyo came forth to renew their vows to the Toyotomi clan. Efforts had been made to try and improve his condition, with one of the wildest tales being body parts from tigers in Korea being sent back to Japan, where Hideyoshi could use them for medicinal purposes, hopefully to regain some of his strength.
Tiger part for like medicine? Is there anything true to it? That sounds like mysticism, yeah? Never use my sword.
Of course, this had no effect, and instead, by September, it was clear that his death was imminent. Knowing this, Hideyoshi sent out parting gifts of gold, silver, swords, and fine robes to his vassals, nobility he was friends with, and the emperor himself. Lastly, he composed a form of death poem to serve as a melancholy capstone to his extraordinary life story. It read simply, "My life."
Tiger teeth. Interesting. Interesting.
Came like dew, disappears like dew. All of Naniwa is dream after dream. On the 18th day of September, dream after dream.
My life came like dew, disappears like dew. All of Naniwa is dream after dream. I guess the few death poems we've seen are kind of like that, because obviously they are written as someone is at the end of their life, so they're never very happy.
On the 18th day of September in the year 1598, Toyotomi Hideyoshi died at Fushimi Castle at the age of 63. In the end, it has been said that his last thoughts were of his vassals and generals, those who had served him faithfully, those he was sad to part ways with. Although he inevitably would fail to secure a state of stability for the future of the Toyotomi family, the man himself, Hideyoshi, left behind one of the greatest legacies Japan would ever know. A commoner and foot soldier who through service became samurai, and from there through achievement elevated his position, succeeding his lord to eventually finish what his predecessor had started, the unification of Japan. Hideyoshi brought an initial end to the wars, a glimmer of what could have been the full end to the Sengoku period. His greatest failure among all of his accomplishments perhaps is simply the fact that he was not able to properly cement his regime, as his efforts to do so in Korea had failed, and thus his plan to see the security and stability for future generations of the Toyotomi family had also failed. What can be said about his time atop Japan is that he laid a solid framework of authority. Throughout his campaigns, his diplomatic skills had secured the loyalty of those who had been his enemies, and his influence spread far and wide across the land through his vassals and the mighty fortresses they occupied. Along with this, his Red Seal edicts were responsible for shaping the new structure of not only the samurai, but also society, bringing an end to commoners owning weapons and cutting off their ability to advance their social status. Hideyoshi made it so that all must live the life they were born into. Everything would have a place where it belonged. These and other efforts he made would lay the groundwork for the future of feudal Japan. Back in Korea, the Japanese armies were pulling out, while brave samurai commanders continued to hold their ground so that others could make their escape. In Ulsan, Kato Kiyomasa held firm against waves of Chinese and Korean forces. At Suncheon, Konishi Yukinaga weathered a brutal allied bombardment and siege, but refused to break.
This guy.
And at Sachon, Shimazu Yoshihiro endured a brutal siege and relied heavily on explosives to blow up the attacking Chinese and Korean soldiers, resulting in massive casualties. Shimazu Yoshihiro is often one of the unsung heroes of the Imjin War, claiming a number of impressive victories and lending much of his forces from Satsuma into the conflict. His son Taratsune also saw extensive service during the war, and it is suggested that at some point during the conflict, Taratsune may have fought alongside a certain samurai who had distinguished himself in Korea as a ferocious and valiant warrior. This man was a samurai from Shinano province, one who had for the last decade been faithfully in the service of the Toyotomi clan.
Sanada?
This was Sanada Nobushige, known commonly today as Sanada Yukimura. Taratsune is famously said to have been taken aback by the skill and bravery of Yukimura and would years later refer to him simply as the #1 warrior in Japan.
Okay.
And as we will come to see, the story of Yukimura will come to play a massive role in the conclusion of the period. Eventually, it was time for the final Japanese armies to make their withdrawal back to Japan, with many boarding ships under the cover of night. The last major battle of the war would occur at Noryang Point, a final sea battle that saw Japanese naval forces engaging the blockading Korean and Chinese fleet. Konishi Yukinaga and Shimazu Yoshihiro would be two of the main Japanese commanders during this clash and would have to contend with that of the famous Korean Admiral Yi Sun-shin. It would end like most other naval battles of the war, another victory for the Korean and Chinese allied forces, inflicting massive casualties and damage upon the Japanese Navy. Noryang would be a more celebrated triumph were it not for the fact that during the course of the struggle, Yi Sun-shin was hit by a stray bullet, which resulted in his death. Yi Sun-shin...
That's crazy how that happens. I mean, he's like, you know, the one of the two greatest like naval commander of all time, and the other one, Nelson, at the Battle of Trafalgar, same thing. I mean, it wasn't a stray bullet at Trafalgar, it was a sniper, but same thing. While commanding the battle, he gets shot by a sniper, and that's how he dies, basically at his greatest battle. Crazy that the two greatest admirals died the same way almost.
Jin would die a hero and is continually remembered as one of the greatest Korean commanders, and more importantly, one of the greatest admirals the world has ever known. Following the battle, the surviving Japanese ships and commanders retreated to Busan, where they eventually were to make a full withdrawal back to Japan shortly thereafter. With the last Japanese soldiers leaving Korea, the war was over.
But is it? Because, we know it doesn't happen, but if I was the Japanese, I would be like, shit, now China and Korea is gonna invade us, you know what I mean? Like, we attack them, so they must be mad. And, you know, China likes conquering stuff, so at this point, you know, like, Hideyoshi dying, losing the Imjin War, yeah, I feel like if I was in Japan, I'd be scared that, like, they're gonna come invade us next. It doesn't happen, but I wonder if it was like something that the Emperor of China or something thought about.
Next several years, Japanese diplomats would continue to try and fix their relations with Korea and China, but it would be some time before anything returned to some sense of normalcy. Many of the commanders who had fought so hard in the war, in Hideyoshi's name and for his cause, came home to a Japan without their great leader. In his place, there was now only uncertainty. The Council of Five Regents was no replacement for Hideyoshi himself, and with Hideyori still a child, there was no central figure to steer the government in a solid direction. What was certain, however, was that those who had fought and returned home were now in an uneasy position, not only weakened by their efforts in the war, but also suffering from...
Yeah, they gained nothing from it. They gained absolutely nothing. China is in trouble, and it's too busy to invade. Fair enough.
From a form of identity crisis, having given their all to a man whose ambitions were never realistically achievable. Some were outright dissatisfied, while others remained resolute in their faith to the Toyotomi name. All of these wrong feelings would soon become some of the driving factors behind the division to come, because, as we will soon see, the very fears Hideyoshi had tried to prevent would rise up. With his death, a path to leadership was beginning to form, for none other than Tokugawa Ieyasu.
Well, I guess it's time for Ieyasu to take center stage. Okay, well, all I can say is that, again, definitely one of the most interesting historical figures I've learned about Hideyoshi, because again, it's so easy to like the story of someone coming from the very bottom, a simple foot soldier, to the very top. And again, I think he did pretty great until he took power, but then, yeah, like the invasion of Korea, the stuff about, locking people into their class. I feel like, once he took power, yeah, he kind of lost himself. Which, isn't rare, like, great military commander, but not a great country ruler, basically. Korea was too damaged and wanted the Chinese to leave, so it accepted peace. Okay. So yeah, just mighty, interesting character, Hideyoshi, no doubt. I mean, I think he's more interesting than Nobunaga, even though I might like Nobunaga more, but Hideyoshi had so much more story to him, since he lived longer, obviously. Next episode, let's see the chaos. No subtitle option, sorry.
In the last episode, we witnessed the death of Toyotomi of and who had initially brought the country into peace by the year 15...
Napoleon or Hideyoshi? I mean, probably still Napoleon. Like, there's still... Simply because I've watched a lot more history about him, so like, I would say it's more interesting because, there's so much more recorded history because it's like just 200 years ago, I think. Yeah. Like, I've watched at least 50 hours of YouTube videos about the Napoleonic Wars. So, for now, I would say Napoleon. Less in terms of like, who's my favorite in terms of character or something, but just that Napoleon is more interesting because I've learned more about him. Yeah. I guess I'd have to learn more about Hideyoshi.
90. A wave of uncertainty had been pulled like a veil across the land. Where once sat the ruler of the new and powerful central government, now opened up to a vacancy, a vacuum of power that had only been replaced by committees of important figures, all spread across Japan with their own unique mindsets, intentions, and interests. Sure, there was Hideyoshi's young heir, the child Hideyori, who resided in Osaka. The boy who was one day destined to take his father's position as the Kampaku at the head of the country, second only to the emperor himself. But for now, the child was long before his time, and instead spent his days away from the troubles that not only clouded politics in the capital, but more widely across all of Japan. Without a clear, singular ruler to lead the nation, it was obvious that peace in Japan rested upon the edge of a knife. Stray but a little, and the country may collapse into a renewed period of civil war. In fact, it is said that following the death of Hideyoshi, many daimyo across Japan, both loyal and questioning to the Toyotomi regime, began mustering their forces for whatever potential conflict may arise.
Makes sense.
One positive factor was that many daimyo were still very much loyal to the Toyotomi family and the peace that Hideyoshi had established. A peace that many of them had fought for in his name. Yet although there were those content with the current state of affairs and did not have any delusions of grandeur, on the flip side, there were others who still did maintain a greater sense of ambition, with the spirit of the Sengoku Jidai still burning on within them. And one such figure just happened to be the strongest power in all the land, Tokugawa Ieyasu. As we have established before, Ieyasu sat in a mighty position, not only ruling over the entirety of the extremely wealthy Kanto region, but also, having kept his armies out of the war in Korea, his forces were at full strength and ready for war should a new conflict arise. He had also been elevated to an extremely high position within the government. Fearing for the ambition of Ieyasu, Hideyoshi had previously tried to keep him in check in several ways, with the most recent being the larger system that was known as the Council of Regents. I described what this system was in the previous episode, but to refresh your memory, prior to his...
I wonder what made them want to rule Japan? I mean, I think, like, for some of it it's just ambition, right? You know, just being the most important person, right? For some others it's, you know, rule Japan to make it better and at peace, maybe. I think everybody has different reasons, yeah. How about playing Shogun 2 after this series? I don't really play games like that anymore on the channel. I mean, also I don't think I'm good at Total War games. Maybe I'd play it, but probably not on stream.
Death, Hideyoshi had established a council of 5 regents or elders. They were known as Gotairo. Their role was in a sense threefold. They were not only sort of the intermediary heads of the nation until Hideyori came of age, but also they were to watch over the boy and ensure a proper uprising for him, ensuring that when he did come of age to assume his role atop the country, he would be completely ready to do so.
I feel like this kind of system never really works. I mean, obviously the old guys will want the power themselves, so it never quite works out, just raising the kid and giving him the throne.
However, lastly, it goes without saying that a final deeper meaning to this council was that its members were to stand as pillars of power and influence, ensuring that no one within the council or below it ever got too powerful. They were made up of obviously some of the strongest daimyo across Japan. They included Maeda Toshiie, a veteran leader who had long served the Oda clan before coming into the service of Hideyoshi. Mori Teramoto, grandson of Motonari and daimyo of the Mori clan, arguably the strongest power in the west, ruling over roughly all of the Chugoku region. Ukita Hideye, an adopted son of Hideyoshi and prominent daimyo, both married to the daughter of Maeda Toshiie and situated between Kyoto and the Mori clan. Uesugi Kagekatsu, adopted son of Uesugi Kenshin and head of the influential and historic Uesugi family, who had over the years become staunch allies of the Toyotomi. And lastly, Tokugawa Ieyasu, veteran and widely respected leader of the Tokugawa clan, a man who had originally been a prominent supporter of Oda Nobunaga before later swearing loyalty to Hideyoshi. Not before he had first challenged him at the Battle of Komaki Nagakute.
Yeah, right.
Hideyoshi had never fully come to trust Ieyasu and had always kept a close eye on his former rival, and without a doubt he was correct in his assumptions about him. Ieyasu was an ambitious figure. From the moment he retook his home province of Mikawa, following the defeat of his lord Imagawa Yoshimoto at Okehazama, he appears to have been on a quest for greatness. From changing his name to distinguish his new identity, to forging a legitimate connection with his lineage that could be traced back to the prominent Minamoto clan, to later facing off against Hideyoshi following the death of Nobunaga, Ieyasu always had what appears to be deeper ulterior motives. But he had always been a step behind, first supporting Nobunaga in his conquests for unification, and later, after standing his ground against Hideyoshi, coming to realize he could not triumph against his might, finally falling in line under his authority. Ieyasu was always forced to play the long game, waiting ever patiently for his time to strike. And although his prior attempt to do so in 1584 at Komaki Nagakute did not pay off, now was his hour of destiny. Hideyoshi was dead, and his legacy called into question following the defeat in Korea. Foolishly, Hideyoshi had done away with his original heir, his nephew Hidetsugu, in exchange for his newborn son. Hideyoshi had left Japan in the worst-case scenario for any future stability for his regime, under the rule of many divided daimyo who were supposed to ensure that his son would one day succeed him. It was a recipe for disaster. This would be the exact type of chaos that would be perfect for Ieyasu. All he needed to do was stir the pot and see where everyone landed. See where each daimyo would choose to stand, with the faltering Toyotomi regime or with the true power in the land, the Tokugawa. It is a clear case that can be made that Ieyasu's attempt at a takeover would actually be very much warranted to ensure future stability. This was no doubt a legitimate reasoning for him as well. Having the Tokugawa take over would be the most logical course of action, rather than have the child Hideyori become a puppet to those around him, which may later lead to another weak regime like the Ashikaga, and for all they knew, another period of incessant war like the Sengoku Jidai. Ieyasu was right to want to preserve the peace and stability of the nation, but to take his own ambition out of the scenario would be wrong to do. If anything, his lust for power should be judged just as equally as his own legitimate motives. Ieyasu knew that the child Hideyori would no doubt be key in everything to come, but as of now, Hideyori resided in Osaka with the senior council member Maeda Toshiie, who had taken up the role as guardian over the boy, despite his own deteriorating condition as he moved further into old age. Thus, to bide his time and to begin stirring the pot, Ieyasu had assumed ownership of Fushimi Castle, Hideyoshi's old residence, and where he had passed away in the fall of 1598.
Okay, that's pity.
It was a powerful position near Kyoto that gave Ieyasu much influence over the capital and politics, a place he felt was befitting for his status. This move alone was one that quickly raised eyebrows, drawing suspicion from not only the other council members, but many other daimyo in general. But moving into Fushimi by itself was not enough to cause major concern. However, what he did next would. One of the restrictions Hideyoshi had placed upon the Gotairo was the inability for them to form major political marriages to other powerful clans, as such actions could result in the establishment of factions which would lead to dissension. Now with Hideyoshi dead, Ieyasu was quick to break this rule, founding 4 political marriages between the Tokugawa and other prominent clans. These marriages were formed between the families of Date Masamune, Fukushima Masanori, Konishi Yukinaga, and Hachisuka Yoshishige. This was the move that truly set things off, prompting many to begin to understand Ieyasu's true nature. With his actions clear for all to see, most daimyo instead chose to wait, taking no stands for or against Ieyasu. Perhaps they were still waiting to see the true extent of Ieyasu's schemes, or maybe they were too afraid to challenge him, being that he was the strongest power in the land. It could even be suspected that many simply did not want to disturb the peace and were fine to let him go about his plans without interference.
The same as all the powers after World War I, right? You know, you see the Nazi growing in powers and they're probably going to attack eventually, but still, you know, you're still reading from like the first war, there was so much, so you just don't want to be the one to risk peace. It's maybe like that.
But there was one voice that did begin to speak out against Ieyasu, one that condemned his actions for all to hear. This was the voice of Ishida Mitsunari. Ishida Mitsunari is someone we have seen from time to time in the past, a figure with close ties to the Toyotomi regime, being that he had long been a loyal underling to Hideyoshi himself.
He was the one that Hideyoshi tried to give him like a command so he could make a name for himself, but he kinda messed up.
Although he had been on many a campaign with his lord, he was by no means an accomplished commander by any regard, as his true proficiency laid in the realm of administration. To this end, he had failed to garner much respect for his name, and even had come to butt heads with many other samurai commanders both during the wars in Japan and later in Korea. This unfortunately led to him souring his relations with a number of significant daimyo, with prominent figures such as Kato Kiyomasa, Fukushima Masanori, and Koranaka Masa, who over time came to hate him. But that is not to say Mitsunari was not without friends. Mitsunari held a prominent position in the government, being part of the 5 Bugyo magistrates who sat just below the Council of 5 Regents. But he was also part of another faction within the Toyotomi regime, known as the Bunchi-ha, which also included Konishi Yukinaga and Otani Yoshitsugu. They came to directly rival the more militaristic faction known as the Bunden-ha, which included figures like Kiyomasa and Masanori. Mitsunari's Bunchi-ha shared a similar mindset that was increasingly opposed to Ieyasu's efforts, and upon the commencement of Ieyasu's scheming, Mitsunari began attempts to undermine his efforts. It was clear for all parties involved that a new conflict was looming off on the horizon as Ieyasu continued to move forward with increasingly suspicious actions, and Mitsunari becoming more and more identified as the main leader of the opposition against him. And this was exactly what Ieyasu wanted. Mitsunari was someone who could rally support to this opposition against the Tokugawa. All Ieyasu needed to do was continue stirring the pot, and his potential enemies would reveal themselves in time.
Oh, I
For
see.
Mitsunari, this was exactly what he needed to do as well, to drum up powerful allies to his side who would support the status quo and stand firm against the hostile movements of Ieyasu. And once
It kind of sounds doomed already. I mean, Ieyasu is probably much more popular with other daimyo as an actual, warrior lord who's accomplished a lot. I mean, he was even the one to end the siege of Odawara. While the other guy, might have some ally in the more like government side of things, but maybe less in the powerful warrior side of things, which means that if it goes too well, Ieyasu easily wins.
such figure who could make a major difference and cause Ieyasu to stand down was Maeda Toshiie, senior member of the Gotairo and guardian to the child Hideyori, currently residing in Osaka. Toshiie had even originally opposed the political marriages Ieyasu had made, yet the two had come to reconcile by February of 1599. Seeing that Toshiie was not above opposing Ieyasu, Mitsunari would eventually travel to Osaka in aims of securing his support for any conflict ahead, as if the Maeda could be courted to his side, it would for sure tip the scales against the Tokugawa. And Mitsunari's mission may have actually succeeded in winning over Toshiie, were it not for the intervention of one key figure, Hosokawa Tadaoki, a daimyo with close ties to both the Maeda and Tokugawa. Tadaoki, knowing Mitsunari's intent, privately met with Toshiie's son and heir, Maeda Toshinaga, and convinced him that Mitsunari likely had ulterior motives of his own, and that it would be unwise for Maeda to support him against the Tokugawa. Toshinaga was won over by the points Tadaoki made, and thus went on to convince his father of this as well. The Maeda would not stand against the Tokugawa, although there were still calls for Ieyasu to resign among other members of the Gotairo. Ieyasu would ignore them, and even refuse to simply meet with them to explain himself.
Wow.
The situation was growing more and more bleak. Realizing how few options he had moving forward, and aims to simply end the threat once and for all, Mitsunari would eventually try to have...
Was one of the clans that started the Sengoku Jidai with Yunin War. Oh, I see.
Ieyasu assassinated, but the attempt would unfortunately fail. With the assassination plot laid bare for all to see, members of the Bunden-ha, such as Kato Kiyomasa, Fukushima Masanori, Kurora Nagamasa, and joined by Hosokawa Tadaoki, Asano Yoshinaga, Ikeda Terumasa, and Kato Yoshiaki, all mustered forces and assaulted Mitsunari's Osaka residence in aims to eliminate him instead. And in particular, I feel it is important to mention the reasoning behind Kato Kiyomasa apparently siding with Ieyasu, being that he had such close ties to the Toyotomi. There are 4 reasons we can attribute to his decision to stand against Mitsunari, one of the largest ones being his sheer hatred for the man. But additionally, he also knew that his rival, Konishi Yukinaga, was appearing to side with Mitsunari as well, another clear reason to take the stance he did. But on top of that, his marriage to the adopted daughter of Ieyasu's second wife, and the fact that he personally felt the child Hideyori was safer without the interference of Mitsunari, all culminated in his decision to firmly take the side of the Tokugawa.
Okay.
Thus, vastly outnumbered by Kiyomasa and other hostile forces, Mitsunari was left with no other option than to flee his residence, dressing himself as a woman to sneak away without suspicion. Oddly enough,
some things never change. Back in the Heian period, maybe, there was a case like that, right?
He would flee to the one place that no one would expect or dare to attack, Fushimi Castle, to seek refuge with his enemy, Tokugawa Ieyasu.
What?
Ieyasu, still relying on the usefulness of Mitsunari to draw out more potential enemies to his side, agreed to give shelter to him, with one of the only demands being that Mitsunari was to resign his position as a Bugyo magistrate. Having been sheltered by his biggest rival, Mitsunari would later depart from Fushimi, as the incident would in the end result in a brief cooling of the tension that had arisen.
Okay.
Yet things were soon to heat up once more when shortly after Maeda Toshiie died in April of 1599. Finally seeing a fantastic opportunity present itself for him to continue his master plan, Ieyasu was quick to move from Fushimi to Osaka, arriving later in the fall of that year to eventually take up the role as Hideyori's new guardian after Toshiie's passing. A move that obviously caused more dissension, as more voices began to rise up in opposition to his dubious actions. It was clear to many that Ieyasu was trying to take over in one form or another, and a choice was beginning to fall upon all. Would they join him, or dare to stand against him? So...
Yabai. I mean, so far it's going pretty well. Again, so far, Ieyasu is kind of using a bit of the book of Hideyoshi, right? I mean, let your enemy make the first move and give you an excuse to respond, so you're kind of like justified in doing it, It's kind of using that. Okay, next episode. Let's go.
This takes you out of the bigger cities like Tokyo or Japan.
Might be a sponsor.
Yet dare to stand for Ishida.
Armies of the East and West.
Ishida Mitsunari was not a well-liked man. As I have mentioned in the previous episode, during his time as an
but at least he had nice hair, At least he had very nice hair.
underling to Toyotomi Hideyoshi, he had neither garnered respect or prestige, and had often simply been considered Hideyoshi's lapdog. He never became a general of renown, and rather spent his time in pursuit of a career in bureaucracy. To this end, his interference with real military commanders had caused a growing hatred for him and the type of person.
As I said before, eventually, once we finish the chronological order, we'll do many streams about many different subjects of Japanese history, so of course I will touch on Miyamoto Musashi, but I have read Vagabond, so if the manga Vagabond is actually accurate, I guess I know the story.
He represented. A veteran leader such as Kato Kiyomasa, who had served much alongside Mitsunari, had in all likelihood come to simply regard him as a slimy, stiff politician who had mucked up military campaigns and who had never truly gotten his hands dirty on the battlefield. The simple fact that Mitsunari was opposed to Ieyasu was enough to even sway some over to the Tokugawa side, lest they stand with someone who they ultimately reviled. But while this was the case for some, others had gravitated towards the Tokugawa because they knew how strong Ieyasu was. Why dare to stand against the man who appeared as if his family was destined to dominate the country for the foreseeable?
I'm so annoyed because I love Ghost of Tsushima, but Sony decided to pull out of putting their game on PCs, so I guess Yote is not going to PC anytime soon. That's so annoying.
Foreseeable future. Why not take his side, not only guaranteeing security for your family, but also perhaps prospering in the long run? But also, I feel there is something else to be said about the concept of strength during the Sengoku period. Even when a legitimate authority in name or otherwise ruled, be it once the Ashikaga or now the Toyotomi, it mattered little when a superior military force existed. The clans would all flock to who was the strongest, a stark contrast to the stoic image of samurai loyalty we are often led to believe existed. This was truly the age of might makes right. But there were also those who simply held more loyalty towards Ieyasu than ever the Toyotomi, not only because he had proved himself a leader of great merit, but also because of the shrewd diplomacy and wooing that Ieyasu had engaged in over the past couple of years. Significant families previously mentioned like the Date, Hosokawa, and Maeda, along with many others, had all made intentions to support the Tokugawa. These were the factors that largely drew many to Ieyasu's side. Resentment towards Mitsunari, fear of the Tokugawa, and simply loyalty to Ieyasu. But if not join the Tokugawa, why stand against them? It's true that there were those who did wish to stand defiant and faithfully support the Toyotomi regime, but they were few. While many others were still very much on the fence and not sure which way to go. many seeing the strength the Tokugawa side possessed, and instead choosing to sit by and weigh their options.
Which is fair enough.
Yet, there were powerful figures across the country who were strong enough to not fear Ieyasu, who bore no personal anger towards Mitsunari and no cause for loyalty to the Tokugawa. 3 of these figures actually happened to be the remaining members of the Council of Regents, the Gotairo, the powerful figures Hideyoshi had put in place to be the intermediary heads of the nation following his death. And although in the spring of 1599 we had witnessed the death of the prominent lord and guardian to Hideyoshi's son Hideyori, Maeda Toshiie, 3 of the remaining members had continually voiced their concerns regarding the actions of Ieyasu. Following Toshiie's death, we saw in the previous episode Ieyasu had moved from Fushimi to Osaka to now take up the role of Hideyori's guardian, an action that continued to cause tension. But no matter how much others scolded him, Ieyasu was now simply disregarding the council as a whole.
I mean, yeah, they're just like, don't do it, Ieyasu. Don't do it. I mean, of course I'm gonna do it.
It meant little to him besides simply his own title. He was deaf to the rising voices of the other council members who had not only called for him to step down, but even to simply explain himself. These remaining figures were
What are you doing,
Mori
Ieyasu?
Teramoto, Ukita Hideye, and Uesugi Kagekatsu. And it was quickly becoming clear that these 3 figures would be the pillars which Mitsunari could use to build his army of opposition. But while Kagekatsu and Hideye were staunch allies of the Toyotomi and would soon prepare for an armed conflict against Ieyasu, Mori Teramoto, although questioning towards Ieyasu, was still contemplating where he actually stood.
Makes sense, the Mori have always been kinda smart, right? So
Many years ago now, he had at one point been at war with Hideyoshi when Hideyoshi was still an Oda clan general. Teramoto, although he had since become loyal to Hideyoshi, was still in the end not overly attached to the Toyotomi. Because of this, he wrestled in his own mind regarding if he should really choose to stand against Ieyasu, a path that may risk the Mori's prominent status in the West. It is even suspected that he did indeed make up his mind to support Ieyasu, but ultimately was convinced not to.
the tree Senryu using Ototogisu described the 3 big bushos. Nope, I don't know anything about this. Not familiar with much Senryu. Which should be obvious since, I don't really do much poetry myself.
By one of his oldest and most trusted advisors,
This guy looks kind of evil.
Ankokuji Eike. It is said that Eike argued that Ieyasu was undoubtedly going to usurp power away from Hideyori, and that Teramoto should stand faithfully by the Toyotomi and against such a hostile action. Teramoto was won over and would resolve to side with Mitsunari. Because he commanded the largest domain of anyone loyal to the Toyotomi regime, Mitsunari was quick to name Teramoto as the commander and chief of his coalition against the Tokugawa. But, as we will come to see, this title would end up meaning little.
Okay.
Over the course of the year, Mitsunari would continue his efforts to garner more support for his side. This mainly took the form of rallying support all throughout the West, further and further away from Ieyasu's influence. This included significant clans like the Chosokabe and Shimazu. In fact, stories say that Shimazu Yoshihiro may have even originally planned to side with the Tokugawa as well. Indeed, like Teramoto and Yoshihiro, there were those in the West who were unsure where they should place their loyalties. With
Nobunaga, if the Kokos doesn't sing, kill it. Hideyoshi, if the Koko doesn't sing, I'll make it sing. Stratagem. Ieyasu, if the Koko doesn't sing, I'll wait until it does patience. I mean, yeah, I guess it's kind of fitting. It is kind of fitting. Yeah, very accurate. I do still feel like, from what we've seen of the series, Nobunaga, it's kind of like, he was more than just, ruthless, right? He was also a strategist, though definitely not patient, I would say. But yeah, it's fitting, especially like Hideyoshi and And Ieyasu, it's fitting.
Another significant figure being Kobayakawa Hideaki. Hideaki was a nephew of Hideyoshi and adopted son of the late Kobayakawa Takakage. He had been a nominal commander during the second invasion of Korea, yet it is here he, like many others, grew to resent Mitsunari, who continually criticized him, bad-mouthing him to Hideyoshi himself and even nearly causing him to be demoted. But now, Mitsunari was trying hard to persuade Hideaki to join him, knowing that the two had become somewhat hostile towards one another. Mitsunari had arranged a deal in exchange for Hideaki's support. If Hideaki were to join Mitsunari, he would be granted the title of Kampaku, at least temporarily until Hideyori came of age, who Hideaki would also be named the new guardian of. This was an amazing offer, a deal that would easily make Hideaki one of the most powerful lords in the entire country. But even then, Hideaki was still torn with what to do.
So
Because of this, it is said he went to Hideyoshi's widow and asked her for advice, to which she surprisingly hinted that it would be wise
Maybe she should clean her clothes a little bit. Just saying.
if he supported Ieyasu. Because of this, Hideaki made up his mind to support the Tokugawa, but in a final twist, he would be intercepted by Mitsunari personally, who managed to sway him over to his side once more. But
Okay.
although publicly Hideaki was appearing to side with Mitsunari, it is also said that he sent a secret message to Ieyasu, still
This guy.
claiming loyalty to him.
Okay.
Whatever the case, Hideaki was balancing himself between one of the most difficult decisions ever, as he continually questioned whether he was making the right choice. Ultimately, we will come to see that his inevitable decision would impact everything. But while figures like Teramoto, Yoshihiro, and Hideaki all required some form of convincing to join Mitsunari, there were few who joined him out of respect. One of which was a well-regarded strategist out of Yamato province, a samurai by the name of Shima Sakon.
Cool name.
Sakon had originally served the Tsutsui clan, but after the death of his lord, had joined up with the Toyotomi. It is not clear when he actually came into the service of Mitsunari, but what is known is that Sakon had turned down many requests for his service by other Toyotomi lords before Mitsunari had come to him. In the end, it would be Mitsunari who would rally Sakon to his cause. Not because Sakon was at risk of joining the Tokugawa, but rather that he himself was respected by Mitsunari, who saw it fit to offer him a generous stipend if he should agree to use his strategic prowess against the Tokugawa. It is suggested that Sakon understood that Mitsunari was not a well-liked figure and knew full well that the road ahead would be a difficult one, perhaps because of this. But through Mitsunari's generous offer and stalwart demeanor, Sakon was won over. It is said that the two of them would inevitably form a bond of loyalty towards one another, as Sakon would work hard to support Mitsunari's efforts. Another significant figure who would join Mitsunari out of respect was Otani Yoshitsugu, a samurai I have unfortunately only briefly touched on in the past. Yoshitsugu had been a prominent general under Hideyoshi, as he and Mitsunari had come to work side by side on more than one occasion. Sadly, Yoshitsugu had over a decade ago contracted leprosy, possibly when working to quell a riot in...
That's why it's dressed like this. I literally thought it's because it's kind of like a monk outfit. Huh? It's because of leprosy. Damn.
In Osaka. By 1599, his body had deteriorated to an immense degree, with his sight gone and very little use of his limbs. To cover his decaying flesh, he wore a white cloth just below the eyes so that others could not see his hideous deformity. Originally, he too, like many others, had...
In the show Shogun, there's someone like that too. One of the regents.
Had planned on supporting Ieyasu. That is, until he went to visit his old friend Mitsunari at his castle of Sawayama. It was clear that Yoshitsugu firmly believed that Mitsunari could not win the conflict ahead. But after deep conversations between the two of them and Shima Sakon, who was also present, Yoshitsugu was moved by their resolve and decided to join with them, even though he figured it was suicide. I feel it is important to mention the friendship between Yoshitsugu and Mitsunari through a story that, although dates back to the Edo period, can still give us some fascinating insight. The famous story suggests that during a tea ceremony, when guests were passing around a cup, bits of pus or mucus from Yoshitsugu's face fell into the tea, and while most present were revolted, Mitsunari is said to have disregarded it and drank the tea anyway in support of his friend. However, it should be noted that this tale has also been told with Hideyoshi replacing Mitsunari's role.
Is leprosy contagious? I don't really know much about leprosy. Obviously, it's, I believe it's an older disease, but yeah, nice story.
Either way, Mitsunari had won the support of his old and trusted friend, Yoshitsugu.
I mean, it's a cool story, you know?
Over the course of 1599 and into 1600, the factions had built up. Those in favor of Ieyasu and the might he represented formed what can be considered today to be the Eastern Army, being that Ieyasu's power base of Edo obviously sat in the east. To the west, Mitsunari had strung together a loose alliance of opposition against the hostile actions of Ieyasu, who appeared more and more like he was planning a takeover of the country. Mitsunari would form what is remembered today as the Western Army. And although there were many smaller figures I did not get into here, this is how the sides were shaping up between the forces of East and West.
It seems doomed nonetheless, because even in the original war, the East was way stronger, right? Yeah.
You can see all of Japan was slipping back into war. A conflict to decide if the Toyotomi regime would hold firm or if the Tokugawa would seize control.
Okay,
So,
okay.
What can we learn?
Well, I guess war is on the menu again. Yeah, obviously, like, I knew again that Ieyasu eventually takes control, but I didn't know who he had to fight for that. So Mitsunari is the main guy. Interesting. Really kind of came out of nowhere, since he was never like a very relevant character through most of the Sengoku Jidai, but yeah. Interesting. All I can say. Next episode, the Northern Rebellion.
As the tension Tokugawa Ieyasu had been purposefully stirring was now reaching its very limits. From spring and into summer, Ieyasu had remained in Osaka, maintaining the role of Toyotomi Hideyori's guardian, a position he had commandeered after the death of Maeda Toshiie, and one that had led him to great influence but also caused great worry. Ieyasu's intentions were clear and indisputable. He was trying to seize the reins to the country for himself, and he had the backing of many. Unlike those who had taken the side of the Western Army, those who had sworn themselves to the Eastern faction were unwaveringly loyal to the Tokugawa. These clans included, but were not limited to, the Date, Hosokawa, Honda, Kato, Kurora, Maeda, Mogami, Fukushima, Ii, Toro, Hachisuka, Ikoma, Ikeda, Hori, Yamanochi, and Kyogoku.
There's a few that we know, but a few that we've definitely not really heard about. I guess they were on the smaller side. Also, one of them is a manji symbol. Interesting. Yeah, I feel like I know 3 of them, I think. That's about it.
They each draw a stark contrast to those who had placed their faith in Mitsunari's Western Army faction, many of which needed some level of convincing, simply to not take the side of the powerful Tokugawa. The Western Army included but was not limited to Ishida, Mori, Ukita, Uesugi, Chosokabe, Shimazu, Otani, Konishi, Oda, Kobayakawa, Tachibana, Wakizaka, and Ogawa. The strongest clan in this coalition was the Mori, led by Mori Teramoto, who Mitsunari had aptly named the main commander-in-chief of the Western Army. And although the Mori forces alone were incredibly sizable, the addition of other regent figures such as Uesugi Kagekatsu brought in a further swell of numbers. Indeed, the Western Army had enough manpower to stand toe-to-toe with Ieyasu. If everyone just played their part and followed through, the Tokugawa grip could be contested. At this point in time, before any blood had been shed, before any shot had been fired, the odds were still roughly even, and Ieyasu had a very real possibility of being defeated. But manpower alone was not going to be what ultimately would decide this conflict, as the Western Army, although strong, was not nearly as loyal to the cause. I'm going to say it now and probably say it many more times, but this war to come was extremely unclear. No one really knew what was going to happen, who was going to still be standing when all was said and done. And it was a terrifying possibility that a mistake in judgment might be made, leaving one's clan completely ruined in the end if their side...
Yeah, I mean, they've all kind of learned from the other phase of the Sengoku Jidai. I mean, you've really got to... I think a lot of clans have learned patience, basically. Like, wait until you see who's gonna really win and join that side, rather than, like, join the dual side.
...were to lose. Of course, this was the gamble Ieyasu was playing. This is what he was banking on. As if he did not simply transition into power on his own, he was willing to risk everything in pursuit of his ultimate ambition. Although he probably had some peace of mind knowing that the Western Army was so internally divided. In fact, this divide even went so deep that many clans themselves were internally conflicted, with family members and retainers all voicing their opinions about who they believe their clan should really be siding with. And surprisingly enough, as we will come to see, this existed in not only the Western Army, but also extended into the Eastern Army, which at face value appeared as the more unified of the two. And iconically, there is no more fine example of internal division than that of the Sanada family. Yet what is interesting to note is that this division was purposeful. The Sanada clan of Ueda is a family we have continued to examine from time to time, as they repeatedly have played large roles throughout the period despite their small size. After the first siege of Ueda in 1585, a siege in which Masayuki successfully defended Ueda from Ieyasu, his sons Nobuyuki and Nobushige were both wed into prominent clans, both the Toyotomi and Tokugawa, to secure lasting alliances and future stability. In this, the Sanada had one foot in both camps, and Masayuki felt the Sanada safe for the foreseeable future. Little did he know that this new conflict was set to one day arise. His eldest son, Nobuyuki, had been wed to the daughter of Honda Tadakatsu, while his younger son, Nobushige, known more commonly today as Yukimura, had been wed to the daughter of...
As I said, I've played some, maybe not the full game of Samurai Warriors Spirit of Sanada, but I wasn't really paying attention to the story. You know, it was just like slashing thousands of enemies. So, what I know they're legendary, I don't really know much of the details of, you know, how they become legendary, but I guess they're already legendary at this point from what we've seen before, you know, the way they resisted all of the strong powers around them.
Of Otani Yoshitsugu. And from the onset, it seemed rather simple that the Sanada would side with the Tokugawa, being that both Honda Tadakatsu and Otani Yoshitsugu supported Ieyasu. But as we know from the previous episode, Otani Yoshitsugu would end up switching his allegiance to his old friend Ishida Mitsunari. Thus now, both of Masayuki's sons sat at odds. Still, rather than outright siding with their new families they had married into, both sons looked to their father Masayuki to decide what course of action the Sanada clan should take. And this is where things get very interesting, because Masayuki, ever the strategist and wishing to ensure the survival of the Sanada, took a unique course of action. He and his son Nobushige would side with the Western Army at Ueda.
Okay. They're like, you know, I know what they're doing. It's kind of like when people bet on, you know, there's a fight, and they just bet on like both sides. Fair enough. So you still win something.
While Nobuyuki would reluctantly be instructed to leave for his castle of Numata, where he would stand with the Eastern Army. This move ensured that no matter who won, either the Eastern or Western Army, the Sanada name would live on regardless.
Wow.
The unfortunate thing is that this placed Masayuki and Nobushige in the middle of a sea of Tokugawa support, as Ueda sat in the east and near the Tokugawa heartland. However, they were not totally alone in the east. One of the largest threats to the Tokugawa was still that of the Uesugi, who after being relocated from Echigo now ruled over Etsu domain. Uesugi Kagekatsu had been a staunch Toyotomi loyalist and was one of the most ardent supporters within the Western Army. His positioning as a powerful Western Army daimyo situated far into the east was cause for great concern to Ieyasu, who continued to watch Kagekatsu closely for what he may do. Kagekatsu, preparing for the war ahead, had been building up for some time, constructing new castles and fortifications, as well as better infrastructure to move his troops rapidly. In fact, Eastern Army clans around Etsu began to grow increasingly suspicious as well. In aims to get to the bottom of things, Ieyasu had dispatched a messenger to the Uesugi, who supposedly was also meant to act as a spy for the Tokugawa. Sensing this deception, the Uesugi tried to have the messenger killed. This may have been the last straw for Ieyasu, as now by midsummer of 1600, he demanded that Kagekatsu personally come to Osaka and explain his actions, which was actually quite ironic, seeing as how Ieyasu had refused to do the same exact thing when asked to do so by the other Gotairo regents. In Ieyasu's case, he wanted answers for the attempt on his messenger's life, but also the continued construction of fortifications and roads, as this was an obvious Uesugi military buildup. Kagekatsu, however, could care less. He would never come and bow before the man trying to usurp power away from the Toyotomi. To this end, Kagekatsu allowed one of his chief retainers, Naoe Kanetsugu, to reply to Ieyasu in what is remembered as the sensational Naoe letter. In this, Kanetsugu completely dismissed Ieyasu's demands and went on to further incite the rage of the Tokugawa. Upon reading his message, Ieyasu could not let it stand.
I want to see what he wrote.
The Uesugi had to be dealt with, but Ieyasu also knew that if he headed back east, his strongholds around Kyoto were forfeit, as without a doubt, Mitsunari would swoop in to seize them. By late July, after holding a war council to plan out the subjugation of Etsu, Ieyasu pulled out of Osaka and began a march back towards Edo. Famously, he would make a stop at Fushimi, Hideyoshi's former power base that Ieyasu had hijacked following his death. It was here he met with his lifelong friend and loyal retainer, Tori Mototara. The two are said to have shared a last somber drink together, as they both knew what the future would hold. As Ieyasu would continue his march back east, Mototara would stay behind with a small force to defend Fushimi. And although its fall was inevitable, he was bound and determined to fight to the death and slay as many Western Army soldiers as he could. Ieyasu probably knew he could never have asked for a more loyal and trusted ally. Upon the exodus of Tokugawa back into the east, the door sat wide open for Mitsunari and the Western Army to seize Osaka, Fushimi, and any other outlying Tokugawa strongholds within the region. This in turn gave further confidence to Uesugi Kagekatsu, who was invigorated by the advance of the Western Army, who he thought would chase Ieyasu back eastward. Thus, within a couple of weeks after Ieyasu's departure, Kagekatsu ordered the commencement of his campaign. His goal was to march his armies south into the Kanto Plain toward...
But then, aren't you afraid of Date coming from behind? Date Masamune? No?
Towards the Tokugawa capital of Edo. And with Mitsunari coming up from the west, Ieyasu would soon find himself trapped in between. However, although Kagekatsu was wary of the Tokugawa allies to the north, there must have been some level of misjudgment. There was anticipation that Ieyasu's allies would likely perform a counterattack against the Uesugi, but the rapidity of their strike must have caught Kagekatsu by surprise. As soon as he begun his campaign against the Tokugawa, Kagekatsu was alerted that Date Masamune and Mogami Yoshiaki had mobilized against him. Their combined assault on the border of Etsu was likely the first blood spilt of the entire conflict. Quickly, Kagekatsu diverted his armies back northward to hold off the Date and Mogami. And
I wonder if there's like specific name for the different era of the Sengoku Jidai, which I guess on its own is already an era of the Azuchi Murayama period, was it? No? But it feels like there's a big difference, like we're in another era right now.
To this end, he would succeed in keeping them at bay. But unfortunately, his bulwark against the northern tide meant he could not spare any forces for an advance against the Tokugawa. This meant that the Uesugi, although contained, were not dealt with. More forces would be necessary to truly crush Kagekatsu's rebellion. And initially, it was looking like further aid against the Uesugi would come up from the Maeda, as Maeda Toshinaga mustered his own army to go and aid the Date and Mogami. However, as Toshinaga was set to move out, his own clan would erupt into a vicious struggle, as his younger brother Maeda Toshimasa rose up and declared for the Western Army.
Well,
the Maeda were now stuck with an internal crisis and were unable to join the fray. This left...
It really feels like we're going back into, again, like, people fighting each other in the clan, people fighting other clan. I mean, it's kind of terrible. I can't imagine being like a normal peasant at this time, thinking that after Hideyoshi, things are finally at peace, and then here we go again. Complain that Ieyasu won the easy way compared to Nobunaga and Hideyoshi. I mean,
Ieyasu, who was weighing his own options of marching into Eitsu to finish off the Uesugi, yet with the threat of the Western Army coming up from behind, his current objective was just to make it to Edo. However, with hostilities finally commencing, word quickly spread of the violence erupting in the east, and soon it would reach Kyushu, where Kato Kiyomasa and Kurora Nagamasa, upon learning of the Uesugi revolt, sprung into action. With the rest of Kyushu largely supporting the Western Army, both Kiyomasa and Nagamasa had their work cut out for them, yet their impassioned crusade upon the island provided more than enough challenge to those who supported me.
Oh yeah, that's right, I forgot about that. Yeah. Again, he isn't Mr. Patience for nothing. I mean, I guess in this time of like everybody just, always wanting to fight, it takes a lot of strength to be patient like he was, and just wait for his moment.
Tsunari. Both Kiyomasa and Nagamasa held personal vendettas against people like Mitsunari and Konishi Yukinaga, and were all too eager to take the fight to them. And while Kiyomasa would continue his efforts on Kyushu, Nagamasa would soon depart for the east to join up with the rest of the Eastern Army commanders. By August, Ieyasu had reached Edo, while Mitsunari, along with other Western Army forces including the Mori, Shimazu, Kobayakawa, and Chosokabe were sweeping over the central region, seizing Osaka, where the child Toyotomi Hideyori resided, before later continuing on to lay siege to Ieyasu's stronghold of Fushimi. It was here Torimoto Tada carried out his duty for his lord Ieyasu, relentlessly defending the castle with his small garrison. For 10 days, 2,000 men held firm against 40,000. Until
Castles.
finally, with things dragging on too long and with casualties mounting.
Bloody castles. Seriously, I've been seeing how much I've been playing Mountain Blade Soku, and yeah, it's, when you're defending, like, it's great. You can have little number and absolutely destroy the attackers, but when you're trying to take a castle, there's like 300 defenders, but you need like 1,000 troops or something. It's such a pain.
Mitsunari resorted to drastic measures, threatening to execute hostage family members of those inside if they did not surrender. Thus, by early September, fearing the consequences, a fire broke out within the castle walls, resulting in a breach that allowed Western Army forces to storm in. Mototada would continue to fight to the last man, until finally, surrounded by death and flames, he committed seppuku. In the end, his staunch defense of Fushimi had caused the deaths of around 3,000 Western Army soldiers, along with significantly delaying the advance of the Western Army eastward. This was a very unfortunate outcome for Mitsunari. Yet still, with Osaka and Fushimi secured, the Western Army now sat in control of central Japan, having ousted the major hubs of Tokugawa influence. Now it was Ieyasu's move. Was he to strike at the Uesugi or march back west to take out Mitsunari? The war had begun. So, what can we learn? By 1600, Uesugi Kagekatsu had been preparing for
what we can learn is that, again, I know that it's not gonna get as bad as it was before, but man, is it like, you know, like, if you're a normal person, I can't even imagine the feelings, you know? Like, we're going back into this age of everybody fighting. That's what it feels like. That's what it feels like. Okay, well, good stuff though. Again, absolutely amazing, those videos by the Shogunate. I love the level of detail between the politics we go into, you know? It's really enhancing the appreciation of the battles and who wins. The second siege of Ueda. If it loads.
Of the year 1600, Japan was at war with itself once again. But rather than the sporadic chaos that had gripped the country for previous decades, instead now was replaced by two opposing forces bent on annihilating each other. To the east, we see the forces loyal to the Tokugawa, whom now found themselves struggling to contain the Uesugi, who had initially sought to invade the Kanto region, the domain of Tokugawa Ieyasu. Now, all throughout the borders of Aitsu, Uesugi forces defended against the aggressive assaults of Tokugawa allies such as the Date and Mogami, Tokugawa loyalists of the Tohoku region who wished to halt the Uesugi advance. But the north was not the only place experiencing new violence. To the west, on the island of Kyushu, lords loyal to Ieyasu now embarked on their own crusade to crush their enemies in the western faction. Here, figures such as Kato Kiyomasa and Kuroda Yoshitaka marched against Toyotomi loyalist forces such as the Konishi, Shimazu, Kobayakawa, and Tachibana. Yoshitaka, the old lord of the Kuroda family, was actually stepping in to lead.
I really like, I think out of all the family emblem, this one is my favorite. I don't know. It looks really stylish, like it's like a flower that snakes around, I guess.
His forces, while his son, the current head of the clan, Nagamasa, hurried east to join up with Ieyasu's grand army. But while these outside flashpoints had erupted to the north and to the west, the most significant area of conflict was still the central region. After Tokugawa Ieyasu had fled Osaka sometime earlier to move back to Edo in defense of the Uesugi threat, Ishida Mitsunari and his Western Army faction, who were loyal to the ruling Toyotomi regime, had swept in to seize Osaka, Kyoto, and any other Tokugawa strongholds. And as we witnessed in the past episode, things were not going smoothly for them. Particularly, we had witnessed the disastrously long siege of Fushimi Castle, where the Western Army would win a costly and time-consuming victory in seizing the fortification from the Tokugawa commander Tori Mototara. But the siege of Fushimi was not the only hardship Mitsunari would face. Seizing Osaka, home to the son and heir of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the child Hideyori, had ended up becoming more of a bane for Mitsunari than he had probably initially anticipated. The first problematic sign came in the form of his own doing. Upon seizing the castle, Mitsunari had told the man he had named as the commander-in-chief of the Western Army, Mori Teramoto, to establish himself at Osaka, where he could from there coordinate the Western Army offensives. This would turn out to be a major mistake. Teramoto was the daimyo of the Mori clan, one of the most powerful and influential families in the entire nation, rivaling the Tokugawa. This had been the reason why Mitsunari had bestowed upon him such an important position within the Western Army. But now, he had told the commander-in-chief to instead sit far back, away from the front and out of the spotlight for any fame or glory. But many within the Mori perceived this move as a slight by Mitsunari. an obvious attempt by him to instead take more of the recognition at the head of the Western Army faction.
Well,
whether or not this was actually true is unconfirmed, but needless to say, there were now many within the Mori who found themselves scornful towards Ishida Mitsunari, one of which was Kikawa Hiroie, who had even before the conflict began been very supportive of the Tokugawa. Now with his lord Terumoto being perhaps dishonored by Mitsunari, it was all Hiroie needed to convince Terumoto that they should send a secret message to Ieyasu. Terumoto is said to have not agreed, but also did not disagree, which was all the acceptance Hiroie needed to send word that once the grand battle was fully underway, Mori forces would not move against the Tokugawa. Mitsunari, in a single order, had unknowingly largely crippled his own army. And if we remember back, the Mori are not even supposedly the first clan to have sent word to the Tokugawa, as previously we have established the Kobayakawa had done so as well. But there was also another incident at Osaka that had gone to sour even more of Mitsunari's reputation, if that was even possible. After seizing Osaka, Mitsunari had attempted to use his increased military presence to capture a number of prominent wives and other family members of Tokugawa supporters who had been living in residences near there. With them as hostages, he would be able to call for many Tokugawa supporters to stand down, as we had seen him do during the siege of Fushimi in the previous episode. But unfortunately, during this assault to capture family members, he would cause the death of the wife of the prominent Tokugawa supporter, Hosokawa Tadaoki. Tadaoki's wife, the former daughter of the famous Akechi Mitsuhide, was a woman by the name of Hosokawa Gracia. Gracia being the name she had taken after converting to Christianity. Upon Mitsunari's attempts to capture her, she had ordered one of her guards to take her life so that she would not be used as a hostage. Her Christian faith had forbade her from committing suicide, but by ordering her own death, she not only deprived Mitsunari of her, but also caused...
Man, I wonder if elements like this, again, if you've seen the TV show Shogun, element like this, what is the book originally? Element like this is what ends up with Mariko-sama. Yeah.
Caused a major disaster to Mitsunari's reputation. Her death would go to further splinter the already fragile alliance of the Western Army faction, as more and more lords continually viewed Mitsunari with contempt or suspicion. Her death may have also been a major contributing factor to the long siege of Tanabe. Gracia's father-in-law, the significant Lord Hosokawa Fujitaka, who had retired in favor of his son Tadaoki, had largely kept himself out of the conflict. But following the death of his daughter-in-law, he immediately moved back to his castle at Tanabe in Tango province and declared his support for Ieyasu. As a result, 15,000 soldiers of the Western Army were sent to besiege him, but as it would turn out, many of them held great respect for old Fujitaka. In fact, several had even been his former students. Thus, their siege amounted to nothing.
Like on one side I want to say, Mitsunari kind of dumb, but it's really not that simple. It's really that at this point, it's just kind of impossible to, like, for things to go smoothly because everybody has so much, like, friendship and alliance with different groups. So, like, all the people he recruited, like, it's all he can get, but also he can't be sure that none of them will, like, betray him or have different alliance. It's just too much of a mess, the current political situation. So you just got to hope that the people you recruited will be loyal. Like, there's not much more to do about it.
As they refused to actually assault the castle. In the end, it would actually be the emperor who would at last order Fujitaka to surrender, rather than let such a culturally significant figure as himself be killed. Either way, Fujitaka had done his part, taking 15,000 Western Army soldiers out of the entire conflict by the time the siege was over. The overall situation for Mitsunari had become much more complicated after seizing the central region. Although he now occupied the most important positions in the country, he still needed to somehow find a way to face down Ieyasu when he was to inevitably march back west. Mitsunari had lost the ability to capitalize on his initial plan of catching Ieyasu between his own forces and that of the Uesugi, not only because the Uesugi were being contained by Tokugawa allies to the north, but also because the process of securing the central region had become, in the end, much more time-consuming. The one thing that was in Mitsunari's favor was that he would likely have the ability to choose the field in which his grand battle against Ieyasu would take place. But on the other side of things, by the fall of 1600, Ieyasu had been reorganizing his forces, with his confidence placed in the hands of Date Masamune, Mogami Yoshiaki, and other northern allies who were keeping the Uesugi pinned down in Etsu. He felt comfortable leaving Edo behind once again to march back west to finally take the fight to Mitsunari. From this, he planned out his march accordingly. He and the main body of his army would proceed along the Tokaido Road back towards the west, while vanguard forces, including figures such as Fukushima Masanori, Ikeda Terumasa, and others, would be responsible for clearing the way and securing important strategic locations, like Gifu Castle, home to Oda Hidenobu, Nobunaga's grandson, who had sided with Mitsunari. But
the Oda already doomed. I mean, they were already kind of doomed after, Hideyoshi, but yeah, at this point it's like they've once again chosen the wrong side of history. It's a shame.
While the majority of the Eastern Army was set to move along the Tokaido, Ieyasu had also not forgotten about the possible threat of the Sanada clan in Shinano province. Remembering back to the previous episode, Sanada Masayuki, who had sons who had married into families on both sides of the conflict, had decided that he would take the side of the Western Army with his youngest son Nobushige, while his eldest son Nobuyuki was to take the side of the Tokugawa, thus ensuring that the Sanada name would survive no matter who won the war. This placed a prominent, if small, Western Army daimyo within close proximity to the Kanto region, and a direct threat to Ieyasu if he were to vacate the area, allowing the Sanada to march in. To remedy this, Ieyasu instead decided to send a contingent of his forces up along the Nakasendo Road, with which they could then deliver a token force behind to mask the Sanada's Ueda castle, pinning them in place. From there, the remainder of the army would move along the Nakasendo until they would link back up with the main Tokugawa body as they made their way into Mino province.
It's so weird that they're still like Oda, right? But we can see that the province of Owari is under the Tokugawa. It's so weird. And yet there's still Oda around.
Ieyasu would decide to entrust his son and heir, Tokugawa Hidetada, with the mission. Under his command would be other notable figures such as Honda Masanobu, Sengoku Hidehisa, and even Sanada Nobuyuki, the eldest son of Masayuki. Together it is estimated that their combined forces numbered around 38,000, while the Sanada at Ueda perhaps only had a garrison of around 3,500. By early October, Ieyasu's army at last departed from Edo and began their steady approach back westward, while his son Hidetada set out upon the Nakasendo to undertake his part of the campaign. However, just as Mitsunari had made a number of unfortunate command mistakes that would damage his army's overall strength, Ieyasu too had just made a similar lapse in judgment.
Interesting.
It all rested with the faith he had placed in the hands of Hidetada. By the year 1600, Hidetada was around 21 years old, and although he had been born into the Sengoku period, he had yet to ever experience war. He was young and unproven, and perhaps was all too eager to impress his father by seizing Ueda and defeating the Sanada, something Ieyasu had failed to do all the way back in 1585, when he was...
Not just Ieyasu. I mean, the Tokugawa, the Oda, the Ojo, the Uesugi, and I guess the Takeda at one point, they all failed to deal with the Sanada, so yeah, they're just insanely resilient.
Was humiliated by Sanada Masayuki, who had not only betrayed him, but skillfully defeated the Tokugawa army during the first siege of Ueda. This is something you can learn about all the way back in episode 40. However, now 15 years later, Hidetada would now try his hand at taking Ueda himself, rather than just leaving a token force to surround it. He must have been confident with the size of his army, but also the fact that among his subordinate commanders was Sanada Nobuyuki, who could be utilized not only in helping the Tokugawa forces understand the local terrain and defenses of Ueda, but also diplomatically. By the 11th of October, Hidetada's army had arrived at Ueda and established a perimeter. With their overwhelming numbers, he was quick to dispatch Nobuyuki into the castle to reason with his father and hopefully convince him to surrender. Nobuyuki is believed to have pleaded with not only his father Masayuki, but also his younger brother Nobushige, commonly known today as Yukimura. Obviously, Masayuki was never just going to give in, and thus sent Nobuyuki back to Hidetada with the message that if the Tokugawa wanted Ueda, they would have to take it by force. Yet, with the knowledge that fighting was soon to commence, the one success that Nobuyuki achieved was to arrange for the families of samurai within Ueda to be released and moved to his castle at Numata. This worked to perhaps raise the spirits of the Sanada soldiers under Nobuyuki's command, who now had less to worry about in the way of family that may be harmed inside the castle during the coming battle. Either way, with word that Masayuki was not going to give in, Hidetada readied himself for the first real action of his young life. But for those of you who don't know, Masayuki is largely considered to be one of the most bold and skilled generals of the Sengoku period. His impressive career even stretched all the way back to when he was still in direct service to none other than the legendary Takeda Shingen. To say that the young and inexperienced Hidetada never stood a chance at taking Ueda would be putting it mildly. Still, if you were just looking at the sheer numbers, it wouldn't be hard to imagine that Hidetada's 38,000 would inevitably be able to overwhelm the 3,500 Sanada defenders.
But defense is very strong.
In fact, this is perhaps what gave Hidetada his confidence. He was sure that in the end he would not only be able to take the castle, but also make it to Mino in time to link up with his father. Soon after receiving word from Nobuyuki, Hidetada ordered the assault of Ueda to commence. Masayuki and his son Nobushige took up their defensive positions and braced for the coming tide of Tokugawa soldiers. And just as before, as the enemy was funneled up towards the walls of Ueda, Sanada gunners unleashed a downpour of bullets that cut the attack to shreds. For 4 straight days, Hidetada sent wave after wave of troops to the castle, and time after time they were shot to pieces, while those that would have breached the walls were quickly cut down by Nobushige and the defending garrison. Finally, by the 16th of October, it had become painfully clear to Hidetada.
They're not using ladders, the soldier in this game. They're just climbing like it's fucking Assassin's Creed. Okay.
Not only had he disastrously failed, but he was now running late to link up with his father's army. The air was filled with smoke and blood, and it was recorded at the time that the Tokugawa defeat was so bad that their number of casualties was seemingly countless. Hidetada had beat his army to a pulp, trying to seize a...
Does it make Ueda the strongest normal fortress in Japan at this time? Because this is the second time that it just survived a crazy siege. I guess the number one is like... I forget the name, but you know, the one that the Itoikis, like, literally were besieged in for 10 years. That was probably the strongest one, but this might be the second strongest one.
Castle he was never supposed to take. At last, realizing it was hopeless, Hidetada broke the siege and rushed along the Nakasendo with what fraction of troops he still had to meet the rest of the Tokugawa army. However, he would never arrive in time to meet his father before the grand battle occurred. Thus, Masayuki had won yet another monumentous victory against the Tokugawa, completely repelling Hidetada and delaying him long enough so that he would never reach his father in time for the battle against Mitsunari. This was actually much more of a major victory than Masayuki might have even realized at the time. You see, with the additional troops under Hidetada's command, the Eastern Army would have swelled up to a third larger than that of the Western Army when they would inevitably meet. Without Hidetada's forces...
The music is great, huh? Is it more like Samurai Warriors music, yeah? Samurai Warriors 2. Great and Go, yeah. Yeah. Music from Spirit of Sanada. Makes sense, huh? Fair enough.
It brought Ieyasu's numbers down to almost equal to that of the Western Army, making his own defeat much more plausible. Masayuki had done his job, and in fact perhaps did more for the Western Army than that of the Uesugi, splintering the Tokugawa army and placing Mitsunari's forces in a position with near equal footing to that of their enemies. The rest was now up to Ishida Mitsunari and the Western Army High Command. Their victory was still very much achievable if they all played their part. For Ieyasu was on his way, and soon the Battle of Sekigahara was to at last begin. So, what can we learn? With the war having begun as forces of the East and West clashed all the way from the north to the far west, Japan was deep in conflict yet again, yet as Ieyasu had withdrawn back to Edo.
Okay, I guess we don't need to watch the recap. Huh? Yeah, I mean, Ieyasu did the classic mistake of, you're my son, so, here is all of this power without you being tested yet. And yeah, it turned out a mistake. It turned out a big mistake, and we've seen that happen a few times throughout the series, right? I mean, someone being your family doesn't mean that they're as good as you. It's pretty obvious. And yet it's a mistake that keeps being made, yeah. It's kind of a shame. Next episode, the Battle of Kuisegawa. It's a shame. Well, I said next episode is Sekigahara, which I've heard the name many times before. But I don't know the details. I just know it's a very important battle. Sponsor maybe?
Before the off hostile military whose army.
Nice to see the Shogunate have some sponsors.
By August of 1600, Gifu Castle was under threat by the Eastern Army as Ieyasu's vanguard forces had moved up the Tokaido to secure the way for the arrival of the Tokugawa main body. Figures such as Fukushima Masanori and Ikeda Terumasa were leading the bulk of this attack. But across the frontier, we see the further advance of other Eastern Army generals such as Honda Tadakatsu, Ii Naomasa, Kuroda Nagamasa, and Hosokawa Tadaoki. With their presence in the region, the road was made clear for Ieyasu. Inside Gifu, Oda Hidenobu, the grandson of Nobunaga and current head of the Oda family, had taken up with Ishida Mitsunari's Western Army of Toyotomi loyalists. But now, in the face of the incoming tide from the east, it was looking like he would be swallowed up by the Tokugawa advance. In anticipation for the attack, Hidenobu had sent out detachments of troops to hold off the enemy, and while their entrenched positions did manage to slow the march of Masanori's troops, Terumasa, on the other hand, broke through and caused Hidenobu to fall back into the safety of the castle, as Fukushima and Ikeda forces were able to link up. Quickly, Hidenobu would send out word to the nearby Western Army strongholds at Ogaki and Inuyama requesting aid. In fact, it is suggested that by this point, Hidenobu was still rather confident that he would not only be able to hold off against a siege of the castle, but also, with the Western Army reinforcements, be able to trap and crush the Tokugawa vanguard.
Makes sense.
Yet that was simply not the case. In aims to press on Gifu before a solid defensive bulwark could be built up, Eastern Army forces began assaulting Hidenobu's last forward detachments before finally pushing up towards the castle itself. Reinforcements had not arrived in time, and soon Hidenobu's garrison was depleted to the last few men as he had tried desperately to defend. In the end, by August 23rd, after a series of fierce engagements, Hidenobu would surrender the castle.
Well,
The fall of Gifu was a hard yet inevitable blow to the Western Army, as now one of its most significant defensive positions had been cleared, allowing Ieyasu to advance uncontested and poised to march deep into the area of
I mean, there was still the mistake at Ueda before, so far, they both made some mistake and lost more than they wanted.
Kyoto and Osaka, just to the west. By October, Ieyasu had finally arrived in Mino province, while Mitsunari and the Western Army had positioned themselves at Ogaki, watching the developments of the Eastern forces as they formed up. And although Ogaki was a strong position for the Western Army to hold up, in the face of the Tokugawa advance, it was not the most logistically smart location. It was actually off the road and could simply be masked and bypassed if Ieyasu wished, which then left the question to the Western Army High Command. Do they abandon Ogaki and fall back to defend Mitsunari's stronghold at Sawayama? Or do they try to make a move here and now? There was no simple
I would say defense, just fall back.
answer, but there would be several options presented. Ieyasu had established his position at Akasaka, a strategic point on the opposite bank downstream along the Kuisei River from Ogaki. Because of this, many in the Western Army camp believed that Ieyasu might actually intend to attack them, but no one could really tell, and the threat of him bypassing the position was still highly likely. Finally, by the 20th of October, Shima Sakon, one of Mitsunari's top strategists, came to him with the idea of launching a small probing raid to test the strength of the Eastern Army's position, to which Mitsunari agreed. Sakon, then with 500 men and accompanied by Akashi Masataka, with an additional 800, set out for Akasaka. Before crossing the Kuiseigawa, Sakon split his forces in two, leaving one half behind on the Western Army side of the river before crossing with the other half. Once the raid had begun, he was quickly confronted with forces of the Tokugawa general Nakamura Kazuuji. It is recorded that right as fighting had commenced, Ieyasu had just been sitting down to lunch. However, once he was alerted of
The battle starts and my man just sits down to eat. Isn't that kind of like disrespectful to your man? I don't know. I don't know.
clash, he took his meal to the highest point he could so that he could watch while he ate. Sakon's forces were quickly
Oh, ton of people are dying. I'm very hungry. Okay.
becoming overrun, and Ieyasu was even said to have commended Kazuuji for his quick response to the attack. Yet, this was all part of Sakon's plan. Falling back to his side of the river, Kazuuji's troops gave chase over the bridge and quickly then became set upon by the secondary detachment that Sakon had left behind in ambush. Ieyasu is then said to have retracted his earlier praise by then saying that they had obviously been fooled by Sakon's scheme. Things were now looking bleak for the Eastern Army forces that now found themselves caught on the wrong side of the river. But soon enough, their savior would arrive. Honda Tadakatsu, one of Ieyasu's greatest commanders and warriors, personally led a relief force to counterattack Sakon's ambush, while Kazuuji and the other Tokugawa soldiers could make their escape. In the end, Tadakatsu would hold the line against the Western Army tide, long enough for his allies to flee back across the Kuiseigawa. Yet their attempts to do so must have been very difficult, as in the chaos of the battle, the bridge had been destroyed, leaving many to have to find another way to cross, or even try to swim.
Can't swim with this kind of armor, right?
Of the surviving soldiers having retreated.
I don't know how heavy this kind of armor was. It's not like Western metal plate armor, right? But still, it looks heavy as shit. I assume you would drown, like seriously.
Tadakatsu fell back, allowing Sakon and the Western Army to start counting heads. It was a complete Western Army victory that went great lengths to bolster their morale, if accomplishing little else. But if anything, Ieyasu and his generals would not be fooled again into being lured across the river.
So far, I won't lie, Ieyasu has not been, that impressive of a general compared to Nobunaga or Hideyoshi. I mean, he wasn't too bad when he was younger, right? But so far in this campaign, he's definitely not been as great.
Into a death trap. Although the question still remained, what would be the fate of Ogaki? In particular, what was Ieyasu to do? Was he actually about to dig himself into a full attack on the castle, or was he simply going to move around it? The victory of the attack at the Koisegawa had at least proven one thing. The judgment of the Tokugawa generals and soldiers was, at the moment, poor, and several Western Army commanders had taken note of this, prominently Shimazu Yoshihiro and Ukita Hideye. In aims to help provide a suitable answer for the Western Army's next course of action, Yoshihiro later that evening came to Mitsunari with a plan, a night attack on the Tokugawa army. Along with having witnessed the display of the Eastern Army soldiers during the fight that day, Yoshihiro had also been observing the status of the rest of the Eastern Army soldiers, and it was his assessment that they were currently exhausted from their long march along the Tokaido. Many of them had been living in their armor for weeks and were in need of rest and refreshment. Yoshihiro argued that a coordinated night attack on the Tokugawa army would not only take them by complete surprise after the attack that had already occurred that day, but also would go far to completely shatter the will of the Eastern Army.
Not a bad idea so far. Like, in a lot of what we've seen, night attack have worked most of the time, right? Yeah.
Ukita Hideye additionally chimed in, agreeing with Yoshihiro's assessment and calling for the attack to happen. It was here that probably the most important decision in Mitsunari's life up until that point fell before him. Given what we know now in retrospect regarding the status of the Western Army and what would eventually transpire over the course of the coming battle, had Mitsunari actually gone forth with the plan, it might have actually been a massive success. And
oh, so it's gonna say no. Again, yeah, like, that's what I was thinking. It doesn't happen too often, but so far, like, I think in the Sengoku Jidai, I don't actually remember, like, one time where, like, a night attack didn't really work out. Almost every time it was a smart move. And at great result, yeah.
Turning the tables against Tokugawa Ieyasu. But instead, Yoshihiro's plan was met with doubt.
But I guess it makes sense because he's not, again, he was never like a commander, he was more of an administrator, as was said, so I guess he would, feel cautious and not want to do such a risky move.
There are several suggestions as to what was said during this meeting, with some saying it was Sakon who spoke out against the plan, and others saying it actually came down to Mitsunari. In all truth, I believe it was probably a mixture of both. Mitsunari was still likely very nervous about making the wrong decision, and a night attack was perhaps the riskiest thing he could do at the moment. On top of that, other generals like Sakon were firm believers that with the numbers they had, the Western Army would easily be able to win the battle in the field. It was obvious that he probably had little to no knowledge or belief that so many of his allies would in the end betray them. And additionally, there is also speculation that perhaps Sakon or Mitsunari called the idea of a night attack cowardly, perhaps to bolster their own belief in a proper field battle. But I tend to doubt that anyone considered a night attack cowardly, especially since samurai had been using night
we've seen it many times.
Attacks for hundreds of years. All in all, Mitsunari would shoot down Yoshihiro's suggestion. But during the course of the conversation, someone had said something wrong. Either it was Sakon's comments about the idea, or Mitsunari's own dismissal of the idea. Whatever the case, Yoshihiro came away from the meeting feeling very insulted by the way things happened and what was said. Perhaps someone actually did stupidly suggest that the idea was cowardly, thus insinuating that Yoshihiro was cowardly for suggesting it. This would have major ramifications, as Yoshihiro's later actions during the battle would now be affected by this very event.
That's such a shame.
It is here I also want to take a brief moment to advocate for Shimazu Yoshihiro, along with Ukita Hideye, who was said to have supported his idea. Both Yoshihiro and Hideye were veterans and proven commanders who had experienced a lifetime of war. Yoshihiro throughout the many Shimazu campaigns throughout Kyushu, and both of them heavily throughout the invasions of Korea. I would believe that their combined military experience far outweighed that of Mitsunari and Sakon.
Right.
In fact, we are already very well aware that Mitsunari was not someone who was the slightest bit militarily gifted. And
at the same time, again, like someone like Mitsunari might not be such a bad thing, because obviously, you know, all those guys with ton of experience is great, but they might also be locked into a way of thinking, you know, which the other warriors on the other side might be expecting. While someone like Mitsunari, in some case in history, someone who's, you know, less of a warrior in the first place, might actually be able to come up with unusual ideas and strategy, right? And that will totally work against, you know, what the other warriors expect. But yeah, in this case, it seems like Mitsunari is not that guy, you know. He just isn't that guy.
while Sakon was known to be a respected and highly sought-after strategist, it is hard to say if his actual experience was really better than these two veterans. It is easy to see why Mitsunari doubted them. He definitely had more trust in his friend Sakon, and was also nervous about making the wrong move or being bypassed. But that doesn't mean he made the right call or assessment. This is one of the rare times where I will say, if I was there in Mitsunari's position, I would have listened to those who were known to have greater experience. There is a reason why Shimazu Yoshihiro's entire military career is more remembered when thinking about him, while in the case of Shima Sakon, we tend to just remember him for the role he played in the lead-up to and at the Battle of Sekigahara.
Fair enough.
Yet, with that said, the decision Mitsunari would inevitably make would be one of precaution. In fear of potentially being bypassed, he would give in to the idea of relocating, sacrificing Ogaki Castle so that he could better stand in the way of Ieyasu and force him to meet him in the field. As for where he would move, it was decided that the ideal location was a spot where Kobayakawa Hideaki had established his forward position, a village located in a valley up along the Nakasendo, a village known as Sekigahara. So, what can we learn? By autumn of the year 1600, Gifu Castle had fallen to the advance of the Tokugawa vanguard, prompting Ishida Mitsunari and his western army to move up to Ogaki Castle in anticipation for the arrival of Ieyasu's main body. It was here by the 20th of October, after the
I mean, Mitsunari is really like, you know, I think the problem with him is, again, he isn't really a great commander, and while he's the one organizing all this resistance, right, and, you know, trying to maintain the Toyotomi name and all that, I guess, you know, he should have really not fucked up with the Mori guy. He should have really made him the actual commander for, like, the actual war, and, you know, he himself should have been, like, in the background, taking care of the political side of things, you know, getting more allies maybe. But the problem is, yeah, like, he seems to be going on the front and making the actual war decision, which clearly isn't working out. Because from what I'm seeing, yeah, I mean, you know, at first I thought Ieyasu, you know, has so much more of a chance to win, but looking at this, not really. So if someone like Mori was the one leading the Western armies, who knows what his story would have been. I think Ieyasu could have potentially lost, because even Ieyasu himself seems to be making a lot of mistakes. So yeah, very interesting. But I guess it's time for the Battle of Sekigahara, which, again, I've seen that name so many times. I think it's referenced in anime many times too, but I never actually know what happens. And I'm guessing it's the decisive battle of the war. So let's learn about it. It's time. Big video too.
in the local.
That's Sengoku Jidai. The Battle of Sekigahara.
At around 7 p.m. on the 20th of October, just hours after the battle at the Koisegawa, Ishida Mitsunari, leader of the Western Army, would call for a general withdrawal, leaving only 7,500 men behind to garrison Ogaki Castle. His forces fell back west towards the location where Kobayakawa Hideaki had established his position. It was a small village located in a valley along the Nakasendo, an ideal spot where Tokugawa Ieyasu would be forced to meet him in battle if he was to continue west any further towards the capital, Osaka, and importantly, Mitsunari's castle at Sawayama. Setting up his army here would give Mitsunari a great advantage, as the natural defensive terrain of Sekigahara would be a tough obstacle for the Eastern Army to overcome. The march through the night was a miserable one, as dense rain began to fall, pouring in horizontal sheets onto the soldiers. It is said that visibility was near non-existent, and perhaps on more than one occasion nearly led to groups of soldiers perceiving one another as enemies, almost starting an unfortunate battle of friendly fire in the darkness. Luckily, things never escalated to that point, and by early in the morning, the divisions of the Western Army had reached their positions. The formation of the Western Army would rely upon the valley's natural terrain to completely block off any attempt for the Eastern Army to sneak through. At the base of Mount Sasao would be Mitsunari himself, joined by Shimazu forces under Shimazu Yoshihiro, while Shima Sakon would set up in front of Mitsunari's contingent, along with Toyotomi retainers at his flank. In the middle were the bulks of soldiers under the command of Konishi Yukinaga, Ukita Hideye, and Otani Yoshitsugu, who would close.
It really looks like a good position too. I mean, the enemy has to cross the river, right? They're coming from the east, so it looks like a great position.
Off the way to the west. And upon Mount Matsuo and along its base was Kobayakawa Hideaki and other Western Army allies. But this was only part of the setup. Further east around the bend of Mount Nangu, additional forces would be established, where they would then pressure the Tokugawa from behind. Here we find significant forces such as the Mori and Chosokabe. This was a brilliant setup and a foolproof way to win the battle, if everyone did what they were supposed to do.
Okay.
As when the Tokugawa army made their way in, their initial engagement with the main line would then be met with Hideaki's attack from Mount Matsuo from the flank, while further down, the Mori and Chosokabe would push up to hit the Eastern Army from the rear. Surrounded, Ieyasu's panicked army would collapse and he would ultimately be crushed.
Sounds great on paper.
Obviously, though, as good as this formation was, there were still major concerns within the Western Army camp. Rumors were starting to turn into open secrets of those in the Western Army who may decide to turn coat during the battle to support the Tokugawa.
I see.
For one, the loyalties of Kobayakawa Hideaki were always in question, as he had been particularly hard to sway, leading many to suspect that when the time came for him to actually take action against Ieyasu, he would choke under the pressure. Additionally, others were starting to spread word of a possible secret pact between the Mori and Tokugawa following Mitsunari's treatment of Mori Teramoto. A pact that the Mori would decide not to engage the Tokugawa whatsoever. But besides those two stirrings, it was also quite clear that the Shimazu were extremely upset following the earlier discussion at Ogaki, when Shimazu Yoshihiro had suggested a night raid only for his idea to be soundly...
That's so bad for the army. I mean, yeah, everybody is like unsure if the others are gonna fight, so the morale must be super low and everybody is kind of like ready to run as soon as something bad happens. That's really bad.
Shot down and perhaps even insulted. With Yoshihiro angered by this, his own motives were becoming questionable as well. Yet even with suspicion of betrayal flowing freely about, Mitsunari remained optimistic, despite others within his own council repeatedly telling him the dangers set before them.
I mean, what is he gonna do? As I said before, right? There's no choice. He just got to hope that people are gonna do what they're told. He has no other choice. What is he gonna do, not fight?
But honestly, at this point, what else was Mitsunari to do? The great battle was set before them. There was no turning back anymore. We have to remember, and I've said it before, this battle was going to be incredibly close, as both armies numbered equally around 80 to 90,000 each, and thus would hinge on the decisions of key individuals. No one really knew what was going to ultimately happen, and there were plenty of samurai who were concerned they had made a mistake and were fighting on the wrong side, a side that was perhaps about to lose. There was an air of anxiety that hung throughout the field, as the growing concern over the pressure of what was about to happen over the next several hours began to really set in. And at the time, the prospect was probably not lost that this was for sure about to be the largest and most significant battle the country had ever faced so far.
Man, watching this series from the beginning, right, we're 50 plus episodes in now, and I think it took him a couple of years to get to this episode, right? But the narration and writing and the build-up has gotten so much better. I mean, the Shogunate, it's great to see the evolution of the channel from the first videos to this one. Great evolution.
Shortly before midnight, Tokugawa Ieyasu had been informed of the Western Army's movements and where they were perhaps heading. It is said that he quickly understood Mitsunari's plan to block his path along the road, and thus quickly ordered his forces to mobilize and follow the Western Army onward. Through the hard rain, the Eastern Army would make their way towards Sekigahara, and it is even reported that during their march, Fukushima Masanori's unit would actually bump into that of Ukita Hideye from the Western Army, a surprise that might have started the battle right there that night. Yet both sides would quickly pull away from one another in the chaos of the storm. By dawn, the rain had ceased, giving way to a dense fog that settled over the land. Through the mist, Ieyasu established his army opposite to Mitsunari's. Although he knew he would need to be the one to take the fight to the Western Army, he still deployed his forces defensively, knowing the possibility of being surrounded and closed in upon. The main bulk of his army would position themselves near the actual village of Sekigahara, with the front line consisting of forces under significant figures like Kurora Nagamasa, Hosokawa Tadaoki, and Fukushima Masanori. While behind, inside the main body of troops were figures such as Toro Takatora, Ii Naomasa, and Honda Tadakatsu. Behind them was Ieyasu's main contingent, who set himself up back along the road where he could witness things play out and lead his troops accordingly. But even further back behind them, he had left reserve forces to catch any attack that may come around from the rear of Mount Nangu. It was obvious that although he had made plenty of secret pacts with the Western Army leaders, he was not about to take any chances. Ieyasu was well aware that he held an unfavorable position in the valley. However, records indicate that he was still confident regardless, so much so that when gearing up, he actually decided to forego wearing a helmet, a move that showed that he believed there would be no need and that his forces would easily mop up the Western Army without him actually coming under any real pressure. This also worked to perhaps bolster the confidence of his own soldiers, to show that he was overly optimistic with what the outcome of the day would be. But deep down, Ieyasu was perhaps much more concerned than he let on, as there was a very...
I love the different portrayal. I mean, it's like that everywhere, right? We talk about Napoleon a lot, but you know, between like the propaganda type of drawings of Napoleon versus, you know, the one of how he actually looks is always really funny. And the difference between like cool old man Ieyasu and, you know, this guy was like, I don't know, it's pretty funny.
A real possibility that he could be defeated here, especially since he did not hold a sizable majority in terms of numbers. Meaning that he may be forced to rely upon the word of those in the Western Army who had agreed to take his side. One of the major things that could have alleviated this concern was the appearance of his son, Tokugawa Hidetada, who set out along the Nakasindo with 38,000 troops to mask the Sanada clan's Ueda castle before continuing on to link up with the rest of the Eastern Army. The numbers that Hidetada could bring would almost definitely swing the balance of power far over onto the Tokugawa side. But as of yet, he had not arrived. However, we do know where Hidetada has been. If we look back to episode 55, Hidetada had instead decided to go glory hunting in attempts to take Ueda Castle, yet had completely failed and was now running days late to link up with his father's army. His decision was perhaps the largest thing that placed Ieyasu's chances of victory prior to the battle in jeopardy. By around 8 a.m., the fog finally began to lift, revealing the armies to each other. Surprisingly, both forces were positioned extremely close, yet they had not known this due to the fog. Of course, the Eastern Army was going to have to take the fight to the Western Army, who were now ready and
That's the
waiting.
problème.
To lead the vanguard, it had been predetermined that Fukushima Masanori would make the first charge. Masanori had previously served under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, leading vanguards on multiple occasions, and was a veteran of the Korean invasions. He was a respected leader, yet being that his loyalties did not initially lie directly with Ieyasu, led another lord to anger. This lord was Ii Naomasa, a seasoned Tokugawa commander who believed that if anyone should lead the first attack, it should be someone who had long served the Tokugawa, and not someone who had just recently switched over.
I guess fair enough.
Naomasa's unit was ordered to act as an escort to a division under the command of Tokugawa Ieyasu's fourth son, Matsudaira Tadayoshi. Yet he was not about to sit by while Masanori took the honor of
Don't
drawing
break
first blood.
orders. Literally, don't break orders right as the battle starts.
It is not known who gave the first order to attack, whether it was Masanori who had begun to advance or not. But quickly, Naomasa and his elite unit of red-clad warriors, known as the Red Devils, burst forth towards the Western Army line. They charged completely past the Fukushima division before Masanori had any idea what was going on. A samurai by the name of Kani Saizo called out to the E detachment, demanding that they halt and that Masanori was to lead the attack. But Naomasa simply brushed it off and called back that his troops were moving forward to make an inspection of the enemy lines.
Leroy Jenkins. But team, Sengoku Jidai.
Masanori caught on to what was happening. They too began running after Naomasa. It was now a foot race to see who could hit the enemy first, Ii Naomasa or Fukushima Masanori. And in the end, it would be the Red Devils who would smash into the defensive line of Ukita Hideye, while Masanori trailed in behind. The battle had begun. Following behind the initial push came the rest of the Eastern Army body as they began clashing with other Western Army forces in the center. While Ii Naomasa and Fukushima Masanori were facing down the Ukita, the forces of Toro Takatora and Kyogoku Takamoto charged in against the line of Otani Yoshitsugu. This was quickly followed up by units of Kurora Nagamasa, Hosokawa
I guess the river is probably not that deep.
Tadaoki and others rushing up to smash into the main contingent of Mitsunari's own troops. Across the entire line, a hard back and forth between tens of thousands of soldiers ensued, as sounds of metal clashed and screams of war rang out, all while the roar of guns drummed on. Rivers of blood must have poured forth as the mud from the previous night's rain had drenched the land. There had never been a samurai battle quite like this ever before. And it is important to remember that this was not simply a battle waged for the sake of politics. Many Eastern Army leaders who were now grinding hard against the Western Army line had one thing on their mind: taking Mitsunari's head, as many of them held past grievances towards him for either his actions under the command of Hideyoshi, or during the invasion of Korea, or even leading up to this battle itself. There were a plethora of people he had rubbed the wrong way throughout his career, and for them, this battle was personal. But as hard as the Tokugawa line pushed after the initial charge, which had at first cut deep, they were now being held firmly back, as the soldiers of the Western Army fought bravely to hold their position and wear away at the enemy momentum. To counter this, Eastern Army forces began using their guns to fire hard against Mitsunari's flank. Yet no part of the battle was as chaotic as the middle clash between Fukushima Masanori and Ukita Hideye, as a desperate back and forth led to Masanori continually pushing in deep, only to time and time again be driven off by Ukita cavalry. For 2 whole hours, this intense struggle had raged across the valley, and one samurai who was present would later write of the scene, stating that ally and foe pushed against each other. The musket fire and the shouts echoed from the heavens and shook the earth. The black smoke rose, making day as night. I can't imagine anyone today being able to picture the sheer carnage that must have played out here. But while the battle continued between Mount Sasao and Mount Matsuo, across the valley around Mount Nangu, the Mori and the Chosokabe armies held their position, as Tokugawa detachments stared them down. Had the Mori and Chosokabe charged in, the situation may have changed drastically, but instead, they waited. Kikawa Hiroye was to be the one to order the attack from around Mount Nangu, But if we remember back, it was also he who had orchestrated a secret truce between the Mori and the Tokugawa, following Mitsunari's dishonoring of Mori Terumoto.
Right.
Thus, no order to attack came from Hiroye. And without the Mori forces attacking, the Chosokabe sat waiting as well, not wishing to charge forth without Mori support. This eventually led to Tokugawa detachments taking the initiative and assaulting the contingent of forces under Natsuka Masae. With their rear flank around Mount Nangu held in check, Ieyasu decided to move his camp further up towards the main battle, just about a half mile from Mitsunari's position. And it is here we can actually get a glimpse at the anxiety that was starting to affect Ieyasu himself, as just before heading out to move his position up, a retainer of his decided to mount before Ieyasu, probably in the excitement of the moment. But this was a breach in protocol that sent Ieyasu into a fit of rage, drawing his sword and exploding forth to slash at the man. Luckily the retainer made it away, but this display definitely shows that Ieyasu's nerves were a little bit more than just on edge with everything going on.
Makes sense.
By 10 a.m., roughly...
I mean, again, the guy has been waiting decades at this point for his chance. And this is it. I mean, if he loses this battle, it might be it for him. All of his patience will not pay off. So I get it. Yeah. And knowing that this is an even battle, he doesn't have any advantage.
No significant progress had been made yet as the Tokugawa line continued to grind into Mitsunari's, with one of the only major developments being that Shima Sakon, whose own position had been in front of Mitsunari's, had been hit by a bullet during the thick of the fighting, causing him to pull back. Shortly after, he would die from this wound. The loss of Sakon must have been a serious blow to Mitsunari, as Sakon had not only been an integral figure for Mitsunari's own strategy, but also he had been a close friend and confidant in his council. His death would have done much to break down Mitsunari's confidence, as well as his own mental state. Yet all was not lost. By this point, Mitsunari was still banking on not only the attack from around Mount Nangu by the Mori and Chosokabe, but also the assault from Kobayakawa Hideaki, who still sat waiting for Mitsunari's orders atop Mount Matsuo. With the Tokugawa line being whittled down more and more by their relentless push into the Western Army front, an attack by Hideaki into the Tokugawa flank would be sure to break the Eastern Army. But it was not yet time for that. The situation on the field was still manageable, and Mitsunari wagered that he could wait a little while longer to continue to let the Tokugawa forces drain themselves before his all-out counterattack.
Makes sense.
The only element of his army so far that troubled him was inaction on the part of the Shimazu, who sat next to his position. As of yet, as the battle had been raging for hours, the Shimazu had not joined the fight. Eventually, this prompted Mitsunari to send a messenger to deliver word to Shimazu Yoshihiro, inviting him to join the action. However, Yoshihiro had no intention of doing so, and it did not help that the messenger himself did not dismount when relaying Mitsunari's word. Yoshihiro gave no response and sent the messenger on his way. It is quite clear that Yoshihiro was taking out his own personal revenge against Mitsunari after their discussion the night before.
I do feel kind of bad for Mitsunari, I mean. Everything is falling apart and he's not even fully aware of it yet, but yeah, like one side of his army has no intention to actually fight, so he's doomed.
If we remember back to the previous episode, Yoshihiro had come to Mitsunari with the idea of a night attack against the Tokugawa position at Akasaka. This had been turned down by Mitsunari, and in one way or another, in doing so, Yoshihiro or perhaps his strategy or capabilities had been insulted. And thus now, feeling scorned, he was not about to follow Mitsunari's command. Once the messenger returned to Mitsunari and gave word of Yoshihiro's inaction, Mitsunari is said to have mounted up himself and rode over to the Shimazu position. It is here, when confronting him, the old veteran Yoshihiro is recorded to have said, "In this battle, each unit must look to its own affairs and fight its own battles with all its might. There is no time to be concerned with the affairs of others in front, behind, or on either flank." All Mitsunari could do was trust that Yoshihiro would do the right thing when the moment came. By 11 a.m., the situation had turned increasingly chaotic as Fukushima Masanori's attack on the Ukita had completely burned out, resulting in Hideye pushing Masanori's unit far back beyond what was expected. But while Masanori's position was suffering, Konishi Yukinaga was steadily being pushed back in the other direction, all while Otani Yoshitsugu's line held firm with no positive or negative movement. The situation as it stood was not an unfavorable one for Mitsunari, as Hideye's push had gone very well. So well in fact that it likely no longer would have benefited from the Kobayakawa assault. However, soon enough, Hideye's momentum began to halt, and he started to be pushed back once more. The time was now for Kobayakawa Hideaki to join the fight, and for Mitsunari to begin his massive counterattack against Ieyasu.
Well,
Mitsunari ordered the signal flare be lit, the indicator to Hideaki to charge down from Mount Matsuo and slam into the Tokugawa flank. After the flare was lit, all attention was drawn to the mountaintop, as Mitsunari watched desperately to see the charge of the Kobayakawa fort.
I feel so bad, again, this guy was probably an asshole and a lot of people didn't like him, but, it's still kind of sad, right? Yeah.
The Kobayakawa were really the deciding factor on the field. If they were to charge down into the Tokugawa, their momentum would be sure to break Ieyasu's tired line. But on the other hand, doing so to the Western Army would have the same effect. Hideaki was indecisive. Even before the battle had begun, we had previously seen the constant wagering in his mind over who he should be loyal to. The Toyotomi, although they were now led by Mitsunari, who he despised, despite all the promises Mitsunari had made for him, or Tokugawa Ieyasu, someone who he did trust and who had earned his confidence in the past, but now was fighting against the Toyotomi regime. Not to mention the implications for what would happen after he did make his decision. If he did attack the Tokugawa, was Mitsunari really about to give him all that he offered? Would he really be the gracious leader he had propped himself up to be? And on the flip side, if he betrayed Mitsunari, he would always have to wear that shame around his neck that he was an untrustworthy turncoat. For now, he sat most—
I mean, you're not the only one, at least. There's a bunch of others, so it's fine. Join the group.
motionless, giving no order, as a completely separate battle raged endlessly in his mind. Faced with inaction from Hideaki, the Western Army began to send up messengers to him with calls for aid from Otani Yoshitsugu and Konishi Yukinaga, pleading for him to attack. Yet he gave no response. Instead, he sat in a state of confusion, unsure of what to do. Yoshitsugu had always
But isn't inaction, action, you know what I mean? Not attacking is basically helping the Tokugawa.
suspected that Hideaki would not be loyal in the end. Upon seeing Hideaki's inaction and having his messenger return with no word, Yoshitsugu would deploy reserve forces to form a line against Hideaki on the chance that the Kobayakawa would come down the mountain at him. Around the other side of Mount Nangu, the rear detachments had seen the flare as well, and many samurai lords began to ask Kikawa Hiroye if he was ever going to order the attack from that side to commence. Instead, Hiroye apparently shooed them away, telling people not to bother him because he was eating. Eventually, Kurora Nagamasa would even send a messenger up to Mount Matsuo himself to discern if Hideaki was really going to defect. He too would receive no answer, yet his messenger would deliver a threat to Hideaki nonetheless. Ieyasu, who is said to have been nervously chewing away at his fingernails, was also entirely focused on Mount Matsuo. Around noon, after the battle had been going on for 4 hours.
I mean, obviously we have this perspective, but Ieyasu is the same thing. He's not so different from Mitsunari, right? He still isn't sure that the people that, promised to betray Mitsunari will do it, so, everything falls apart if some of them decide to actually stay loyal to Mitsunari and do the attack as planned.
Hours, and roughly only 1 hour after Mitsunari had lit the signal flare, Ieyasu would take the initiative. Believing that Hideaki needed to be forced into action one way or another, he ordered a detachment of his gunners to begin firing up at the mountain towards the Kobayakawa position. Ieyasu by this point knew that Hideaki was not going to make the decision himself. Instead, Ieyasu had to force him to make it. This was a risky move. Directly attacking the Kobayakawa could have a negative effect, prompting them to join the side of Mitsunari. But the alternative would be that it would scare Hideaki into joining the Tokugawa. Finally, with bullets now raining onto his position, Hideaki knew he could wait no longer. He quickly sprung up into action and ordered his forces to attack Otani Yoshitsugu. Hideaki had turned coat and was now about to assault the Western Army.
Well,
soon enough, Kobayakawa troops began flooding down the mountainside toward Yoshitsugu's position. He had been right to deploy a detachment to guard his flank against Hideaki, yet it was only a portion of his forces as the rest were still fighting against the Tokugawa main advance. Hideaki's defection also caused other units at the base of Mount Matsuo to join his charge as well. Massively outnumbered and now being hit from multiple directions, the Otani line began to crumble. Yoshitsugu knew all hope was lost, yet he could not think to flee. He was a leper and was in no condition to run. Instead, he turned to his retainer, Yuasa Goro, and asked him to take his head and hide it so that it could not be claimed as a trophy. Goro followed his orders and is said to have wept as he cut his lord down. He would successfully hide Yoshitsugu's head before taking his own life. In the end, it would never be found.
Damn.
With the Otani lost, neither Ukita Hideye nor Konishi Yukinaga had anticipated Hideaki's treachery, and thus they were unprepared for the tide of turncoats that were now flanking their position as well. The entire Western Army line was now completely collapsing as Eastern Army troops began to break through and encircle around to the rear.
I really had no idea that the Battle of Sekigahara, which again I've heard the name so many times, was like this. I always thought it was like a great strategic battle or something. Not that it was a battle of, who's gonna betray who. Very interesting.
All Mitsunari could do was watch in despair, while Ieyasu was probably grinning from his gamble paying off. Ukita Hideye is said to have even tried to launch a desperate attack against Kobayakawa Hideaki in attempts to take his head in revenge for his betrayal, yet his own lieutenants would hold him back. Finally, with the Eastern Army pushing in from all directions, the Shimazu were at last engaged, as Naomasa spurred forth viciously to crush Yoshihiro. Naomasa's onslaught smashed into the Shimazu line, and before long, Yoshihiro's nephew Toyohiza would be cut down while defending the position. Yoshihiro now had two options: stay and fight to the death, or fight his way out and retreat. He chose the latter and thus ordered a full charge southbound where he could withdraw around the back of Mount Nangu. The Shimazu forces would have no other choice than to hack their way through the enemy, and so they did, fighting heroically as they pushed through the Tokugawa lines. Still, Naomasa was bound and determined to not let Yoshihiro get away. He kept the pressure on until finally Shimazu gunners would deliver a shot to him that would take him out of the action. Without Naomasa hot on their heels, the Shimazu were able to successfully fight their way out. The Shimazu retreat would be spotted by the Chosokabe, who had still been sitting idly by Mount Nangu.
What are they doing?
Upon learning of the developments of the battlefield, they too began to scatter. The situation for the Western Army had turned into a mass rout, and with all hope having faded, Ishida Mitsunari and his personal guard fled the field. By 2 p.m., roughly 6 hours after the battle began, the Western Army had completely fallen. Tokugawa Ieyasu had won the Battle of Sekigahara,
the country is
thanks to those who decided to betray Ishida Mitsunari. It was here, seeing the Western Army in full retreat, Ieyasu ordered a
So again, it's like interesting. Compared to Hideyoshi or Nobunaga, Ieyasu seems like less of a great general, right? Where he won right here is politics, because in the end he just did a frontal attack, right? But where he won is that, he was good at politics and convinced people to switch side. That's really interesting.
General advance, and at last finally put on his helmet and stated his famous quote, "After victory, tighten your cords." This had been the largest battle Japan had ever seen up until that point, with roughly 170,000 men fighting on the field that day. And while the actual number of casualties is still debated, with some saying as many as 30,000 dead, other sources suggest that by the end, up to 60,000 heads would be taken. Either way, It was a massive clash with a monumentous loss of life. But for Ieyasu, it was all worth it now.
It's perfect.
For victory was his. So, what?
Man, there was something. There was something. So that is the Battle of Sekigahara. I feel like again I've heard that name for 15 years watching anime. And finally I know what happened from the build up to it to what actually happened. Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. But it's done. I mean, it really is done. There's no way they're ever going to be able to stand up again. I mean, Mitsunari is done. It's done. Okay. Well, that is it. Great episode. Great video. The next one is the Sekigahara Aftermath. So sharp.
After 6 hours of what had been some of the most intense warfare Japan had ever seen, thousands laid dead upon the field of Sekigahara. Streams of blood must have flowed freely, and the mud from the previous night's rain must have soon taken a grisly color mixed with the carnage of the day's events. Scores of bodies likely now rested headless upon one another, as victorious Eastern Army soldiers scavenged over the corpses, making sure no high-ranking fallen samurai was left unaccounted for. As those still living took their trophies and continued onward, with heads atop spears, adorning sashes, and carried within their very hands.
It's such a crazy thing. I mean, I'm sure Japan wasn't the only country in history to do this, but you know, like winning a battle and then just cutting people's head off of dead bodies, right? It's kind of crazy to me. Like killing them wasn't enough, you know. You have to also cut off their head and put them on a spike. Yeah.
There was no telling if this was to be the final great battle of the samurai, but for many, I would imagine they believed this was the end, the last great chance to make a name for themselves in the midst of war. Tokugawa Ieyasu, victorious, upon realizing his triumph, had sprung into action. As I mentioned in the previous episode, it is believed that he did not even don his helmet until after he was certain the battle had been won. Now it was time for the cleanup. Throughout the course of
Musashi? Really? Interesting. I thought he was like a little bit later, yeah? Was he even born at this point? Oh yeah, I guess he was. Interesting.
the battle, Ieyasu was lucky
Which
that
side
none
he
of his
was on?
important allies had lost.
In 84, okay, yeah. I do remember that the beginning of the Vagabond manga is in the Sengoku Jidai. Yeah, that's right.
Lost their lives during the fighting. The same could not be said for the Western Army, as leaders such as Otani Yoshitsugu and Shima Sakon had both died, both of them being some of the largest and closest supporters of Ishida Mitsunari. It is believed that after the field was secured, Ieyasu awaited his generals as they came up to report to him. Now it is hard to say what words they actually shared, or really know in what order they arrived, but one telling of this encounter goes as follows. First, it is said that Kuroda Nagamasa was the initial general to ride up to Ieyasu's position, to which Ieyasu is believed to have highly praised him, stating, "Today's victory is entirely due to your loyalty."
And Tokugawa and fought here, or he was a pro-Tokugawa and fought elsewhere. I mean, yeah, fair enough. No idea. But how is it like debated? I feel like there would be, if he was at that, he would have wrote it in his memoirs or whatever, where we know the rest of his life.
And effort. As long as my house flourishes, the Kuroda shall want for nothing. Ieyasu is then believed to have personally gifted Nagamasa a treasured short sword. The next to arrive were Honda Tadakatsu and Fukushima Masanori, both of which Ieyasu praised as well, as it was Masanori's unit that had seen some of the thickest fighting. After this, it is said that Ieyasu's fourth son, Matsudaira Tadayoshi, entered the camp, helping the wounded Ii Naomasa. If we remember back to the previous episode, Ii Naomasa's unit was to accompany that of Tadayoshi's. Yet Naomasa, eager to take the fight to the Western Army, had led
Oh yeah, is he gonna get punished?
his unit hard against the enemy line, and even attempted to chase down the fleeing Shimazu, only to be hit by a bullet in the shoulder. If bandages had not already been brought up for Naomasa, Ieyasu surely would have been quick to call for them. Naomasa likely told Ieyasu how well Tadayoshi fared during the battle, and remarked, "But hawks of fine stock always turn out well," which then caused Ieyasu to return the compliment, reminding Naomasa that a good trainer is still necessary, no matter how well bred the hawk. It was only after the arrival of all others that at long last Kobayakawa Hideaki, the great turncoat, is believed to have made his way onto the scene. Obviously, this must have been a tension-filled moment as Hideaki threw himself before Ieyasu, apologizing for not only appearing to stand with Mitsunari, but also for his long period of inaction during the battle itself. To make up for his mistake, Hideaki petitioned Ieyasu to allow him to lead the attack on Mitsunari's stronghold of Sawayama, and it appears that Ieyasu, in the end, consented. Yet another means in which to firmly test Hideaki's loyalty.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, he still did betray him, so...
Eventually following this, a formal head-viewing ceremony would commence, in which Ieyasu bore witness to those who gave their lives for the Western cause. The one head he likely wanted to see the most but did not have before him was that of his main enemy, Ishida Mitsunari, as following the chaotic end of the battle, Mitsunari had endeavored to flee the scene. Now, Ieyasu would be forced to send out units to hunt him down. Not long after the battle was done and heads were being viewed, Ieyasu's son and heir, Tokugawa Hidetada, finally arrived. His foolish attempt and failure to seize Ueda from the Sanada had caused him to completely miss the battle and nearly cost his father everything.
I still feel bad for him because, again, you know, like, you might say he fucked up, but it's his dad that fucked up. It's Ieyasu that fucked up, putting him into this position, like, such a massive army as his first command when he's, like, young and he hasn't really got any experience. I mean, you know, it's kind of Ieyasu's fault. I don't know if it will be mentioned, but Kobayakawa would drink to death 2 years later. Well...
As if he had been there with his additional troops, the battle would have started out much more in Ieyasu's favor. Instead, the battle had been a great gamble, one that could have gone either way were it not for those who decided to betray Mitsunari. For this, Ieyasu refused to speak with his son for some time, his lapse in judgment getting tied down trying to take a castle he was never supposed to seize nearly cost the Tokugawa the entire war. If anything, Hidetada's failure now put a great deal of stress onto Ieyasu, who was now likely much more concerned about the future of the family once Hidetada was to succeed him one day. However, with the Battle of Sekigahara won and the Western Army in full retreat, the way was clear for Ieyasu to further advance towards Kyoto and Osaka, clearing aside any other last pockets of resistance along the way. As soon enough, after bitter fighting during Hideaki's assault on Sawayama, the castle would fall, leaving many of Mitsunari's family dead. By this point, as Ieyasu neared Osaka, Mori Terumoto was still stationed there, right where Mitsunari had previously placed him. Yet now, with Mitsunari defeated, Ieyasu had to figure out what to do with the Mori. Kikawa Hiroye had been the driving force behind the Mori clan's disobedience at Sekigahara. As if we remember back, he had been the one who had made a secret pact with the Tokugawa in the aftermath of what many in the Mori camp believed was a disgrace upon Terumoto by Mitsunari for placing him so far back behind the action. But now, Terumoto was essentially at the mercy of Ieyasu. It is believed that Ieyasu actually felt no remorse towards the Mori, as their inaction itself was perceived as dishonorable, being that the Mori had completely sat out of the Battle of Sekigahara. They had forsaken the oath they had made to the Western Army, and breaking an oath was something that some believe Ieyasu could not forgive, no matter who the oath was to. Personally, I think it was just a convenient excuse to cut down the power of the Mori, as the Mori
Fair
had
enough.
become the most
They were like the other strongest power.
significant clan in the West. This leads into what is the truth, how Ieyasu would see fit to punish the Mori, as they would come to see a massive reduction in territory under his rule. For this, Kikawa Hiroye must have been completely distraught, that in his actions to preserve the Mori, he had actually severely damaged them. Over the coming weeks, Ieyasu would cement his position, as the battles that had erupted across Japan began to end, from the conflicts in the Tohoku region in the north, to the campaigns on the island of Kyushu to the south. With Ieyasu's clear victory, hostilities began to cease.
That's it.
The conflict we today call the Sekigahara War was over.
That's what they call
As
it.
for Mitsunari, he would at last be captured by an eastern samurai named Tanaka Yoshimasa.
I'm surprised he hasn't killed himself like they usually do.
And not long after, he too would be reunited with other Western Army generals who had been caught as well, that of Konishi Yukinaga and Ankokuji Eike. Interestingly enough, for Yukinaga, upon his capture it is said that he had been offered the chance to commit seppuku, yet due to the fact that he was a Christian, he firmly declined the idea of killing himself. Yet the actions of Yukinaga mattered little. Mitsunari was the true prize. For several days he was to be put on public display as a traitor for all to see. He was paraded through city streets and shackled before crowds of people. Even then, it is believed he kept his head held high, not letting the circumstances drown his pride. And
I mean, he may have lost, but, you know, he did what he believed, so at least there is that, right?
why should they? He had done what he thought to be right. He had championed the
Here we go.
Toyotomi name in the face of one who had aimed to usurp it, and no matter what his own personal ambitions may have been, would he have succeeded, he should have at least held no regrets in his conviction. By the 6th of November, roughly 2 weeks after the Battle of Sekigahara, they were all executed at Rokujo Gawara in Kyoto. Of the other prominent Western Army samurai who survived the battle and were able to make a full retreat were that of Shimazu Yoshihiro and Ukita Hideye, who were both able to escape back to the Shimazu homeland in Kyushu. It would be here Hideye would seek shelter for some time, while his actual domain back in Honshu was to be seized. The Western Army was officially no more, and all those who saw fit to challenge the Tokugawa were now either dead, defeated, exiled, or forced into hiding. After 2 years of scheming and stirring the pot, Ieyasu had won, and now held a commanding grip over the nation, something that perhaps had long been his ambition.
Yeah.
Under his rule, he could build a strong regime, one that could hope to stand the test of time. The way was clear for him to establish his new military government.
I mean, as far as I know, there's peace for like a few hundred years, so it kind of works out.
So, what can we learn?
Okay, well, all I can say is congratulations, Mr. Tokugawa Ieyasu. You have done it. You have done it. In the end, my opinion of all this is definitely changed a little bit. I do really think Mitsunari had some chance, you know. He had some chance potentially, like, it wasn't a clear, you know, Ieyasu is so overpowered, there's zero chance that he loses. He really could have lost. But yeah, it worked out in the end, but it was much closer than expected. Great stuff, and finally I know Sekigahara, so happy about that, yeah. I'll take a quick break before we continue. Give me 5 minutes as always, coming back. Okay, I'm back, but unfortunately, I will have to stop here for today. I've got something to do that wasn't really planned. Not very happy about it. I will spare you the details, but yeah, I guess I have to leave it at that. Well, I guess there's still like a lot. There's like 2 hours more of this. I didn't realize there was still so much, so, you know, it's enough for one more stream. So yeah, I guess we'll finish maybe Saturday. I think Saturday I'll do as always like a Japan Prefecture stream, and then after that we finish with the end of the Sengoku Jidai. I mean, there's 6 episodes left, I believe. Yeah. Yeah. And actually, it looks like there's still more battles, so... Okay, I guess we're not done. I'm surprised. I thought the battles would be done, you know? But yeah, sorry about that. Sorry for the wait to come back to say it's over, but yeah. I have something I need to do, so we'll finish next time. Tomorrow I'm reacting some Golden Kamui. Thank you as always, guys, for coming. I hope you enjoyed the stream. This was a great one, really interesting what we watched, even if I'm cutting it a bit short. Like, subscribe, comment as always, and yeah, I'll probably see you Saturday to finish this. See you guys next time. ExoticBankai.